You're now live, Chair.
Great. Thank you all for joining us for our Overview and Scrutiny Committee, focusing on the HSDP. Can I welcome you all to our virtual meetings? Present, we've got members of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, cohorted members of the committee, as well as representatives of the Harrow Youth Parliament. Also present, the portfolio holder for finance resources and council officers. For members of the committee, can I ask that you keep your cameras on during the meeting, but please mute yourself when you're not speaking. For other members and participants, if you switch off your video unless you are speaking, that will be just helpful. In case of technical problems, we will adjourn. We haven't actually had any technical problems for the entire time we've been virtual on the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, so hopefully that should be okay. And this is, as is usual, this meeting is being video and audio recorded and will be, in fact, is being streamed live on the council website and will be available for people to watch outside. So I will introduce officers once we get to it, but I will move on to item 1 on the agenda, which is reserve members, and Angela.
Yes, hello Chair, I'm reserving for Councillor Maru.
Great. Are there any other reserve members? No. Great. Declarations of interest, they have been published online. If there are any that people now know that they didn't declare at the time, please feel free to declare now. No, great. Okay, so we're going to move on to item 3, which is the Harrow Street Development Partnership contract close and establish. This is an item that we have spent an incredible amount of time on in terms of the scrutiny we've had, both through the original decision of Cabinet through to the accommodation strategy, and this one we've had a number of meetings, a number of informal sessions and a number of sessions. So I do want to highlight my thanks early on to officers who have provided a lot of information to the committee when needed. The meeting today is inevitably going to be long. This is the single largest contract the council has signed in my time as councillor, so since 2010, and it's important that we do spend time on it. So we are probably we will try and finish by 9 PM tonight. We may go on a little bit longer, but I recognise that for councillors that work all day, for officers have been working at the council all day and are coming this evening, so we will try and not go past 9:30, and we will try and finish at 9. In terms of officers present today, we've got a great list of Harrow's finest officers. Julian is leading on the work. We've met him many times. Dawn is here on the finances. Matthew from the council's legal team. Our chief exec Sean is with us from our external advisors. Ishdeep from Avison Young. Scott Morrison, our legal advisors from Pinson Mason, and from Waits themselves, Bahija, as she has been before. So the way we're going to operate today is, first, there are both part 1 and part 2 items, and we will move to part 2 at the end. So just be careful in terms of when you're asking questions about whether part 1 or part 2. We are going to try and group questions. So we're going to start with matters for Waits operationally, then look at questions around governance and structure, then business planning, moving on to finance, then risk register, then the housing, then on to accommodation strategy, and then any other issues. Waits will be with us from certainly for Waits operational matters and up to the business plan. as we are scrutinising the council decision to partner with Waits, it wouldn't be appropriate for Waits to be here for the whole time. So we will. There'll be a point where we'll ask. We'll give Bahija her evening back for a little bit, so that she can go and do what she wants to do. But we will ask Bahija to be on standby for when we go into part 2. If there's any issues that we need Waits in part 2, for Bahija to come back. So that is the process. We are going to open with introductions from the administration and then from officers. With answers to questions, can I ask that answers be both the questions and the answers are brief. I know that we've got a huge number of officers here with a huge amount of experience, and you do want to give it, but please don't necessarily feel that all officers need to answer all the questions if you feel like the person that's answered it has done it well. But of course, that doesn't mean you don't answer if you feel that there's something particularly useful for the committee, or just a clarification. But again, don't feel you need to answer all the questions. For committee members, again, if the questions are brief, that will allow us to get through as many questions and hopefully get through answers and in time. Finally, we are looking to have some recommendations that come out of today. Exactly the process for that, I think, will work out towards the end of the meeting. Sorry, that was an incredibly long introduction that included telling everyone to speak quickly. So I may have already broken my own rules. On that note, I know that I did see the leader pop up first, so I'll probably hand over to leader to introduce before bringing Julian in. Graham, did you want to introduce the report?
Yes, thank you, Sachin. I will try and be brief to save time, although I'm not renowned for being brief on certain reports. And this one, I think, has taken a lot of effort and a lot of time to get where we are today. So it started quite a few years ago of ensuring that we can make best use of our sites, understanding around housing, also talking around how we support, also within the reports, it talks about the place itself and also the communities that we represent. So a decision was made, one decision was made, a key decision was made in 2019 that we went out and moved towards the preferred bidder stage, going out to tender against a cost neutral sort of civic centre, but also building housing on these key sites. We agreed not to put all the Harrow sites into the pot. No, we haven't put Greenhill Way or all the leisure centre sites. It's in stages. So they've been out to tender on this, and then the pandemic hit us quite hard. But the team should be congratulated for the amount of work they've put in during COVID, as long as everything else, to try and keep this on track. We should have been at this position back in about February time this year. But with the rise again of the pandemic, it has caused a few more problems and slight delays in amount of work. So it is a capacity issue of the organisation. But I think we're in a very good place. We went out to get, as we signed off as a preferred bidder last year with Waits, and those contract negotiations have been taking place, well supported by Pinsent Mates and Everson Young, and the team have got where we are. That was the first decision was made to move it into Wealdstone as a new civic centre. That decision has been made some time ago, and then a few months ago we moved into the accommodation strategy about changing slightly around what we really need in a new civic centre and where we could operate from the depot sites, and that's all been agreed and signed off. So the decision that this one is about is, do we go ahead with Waits as our business partner? In sort of a strategic development partner, setting up to bring their experience into Harrow, to work with us as councillors, work with officers to deliver what we set out right at the beginning, which is the affordable housing that we desperately need and improvements to the sites we have. From my experience of working through this over the last year, it has been very time consuming. We have briefings quite regularly on this, as you would expect. The officers have been spending a lot of time over it, and it hasn't been without challenge. but I think we've Waits has shown themselves to be a very willing partner. I think in the sense that they would have a joint ambition with us to deliver this on time and to the costs that are available, to the price budget and capital budget that we've set out. One of our key parts was that we did need a cost neutral civic centre. The reason was our budget is under massive pressure, and with 78% of our budget being paid by council tax, we couldn't put that into the mix of affecting that. And Waits have come back. Actually, the bidders did all come back, and they're very similar in some of the designs they were looking at. But Waits have come up with a very good sort of model that we can move ahead with, and still delivers all the ambition that we wanted right at the beginning. I will leave it there at the moment, Sachin, because I think there's lots of questions that will come through, and we'll be able to answer that as we go through.
Great, thank you, Julian.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So obviously with a report of this length, I could go on for some time, but what I'm going to do is point members to the key parts of the report and the key headlines and to the recommendations. And then, as you say, we can go into questions. It's already been said that...
Sorry, may I ask a request? Would you kindly, when you point us to things, give us the page number, please, Julian?
Yes, indeed. Yes, I'll do my very best. Please.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the introduction.
No, it's okay. Tell me if I fail you at any time.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes. As has already been said, this is part of a three-part process. The first report was the 2020 preferred bidder report in September, at which you appointed Waits to be your preferred partner. The second part was the accommodation strategy, which, as you'll recall, was considered during the month of May. And this report recommends the contract closure and the establishment of the House Strategic Development Partnership. So much of the issues that are in here we have talked about before, and some of it will be a familiar ground to you. So the first part is the introductory paragraph. The report on pages 2 and 3 reprises the reasons why you came to this, looks at your ambitions, and also considers the need for the new civic centre. That's in section 2.4, and then revisits the procurement process at 2.5, and reminds you of the reasons that you chose Waits back in September at 2.6. I'm looking now at section 2.7 and going into the legal documentation. The next set of the report covers the legal documents, describing them, and there is in the appendix in the private portion a summary of the legal documents, what they do and how they work from Pinsent Masons, and this takes you through this in some detail. At the request of the Chair, we circulated the actual members agreement today, but this summary will give you the transactional detail and tell you how all that works. The legal structure is set out at 2.10, and you'll remember that this is a limited liability partnership. It is 50% owned by the council and Waits, and that each of those three partners appoint a board of 3 members. And the decisions are taken in accordance with the delegations policy. That is attached to the Pinsent Masons report. And the important thing to remember about that is that significant decisions, and I'm thinking particularly of things like the business plan, of which more in a moment, they are decisions that come back to the council and indeed to Waits as your partner for them to agree. The legal structure also sets out what happens when the members disagree. It sets out the provisions for deadlock, and it also sets out the principles for termination if that should become necessary. Section 2.11 looks at the financial structure, and the principle being that the council and Waits operate on that 50-50 basis, and the council contributes its land. That is matched by a financial contribution from Waits, and because to enable the HSTP to borrow, which all developers have to do, and in this instance the HSTP is no different. To get to a 35% equity to debt ratio, the council also contributes additional funding to match that, and that is essentially how that works, except insofar as where the council commissions works, for example, the new HNC, for example, affordable housing. If the council, following due diligence, decides to do that, then the council directly funds that, and it simply pays the HSBDP to do it. 212 sets out the process for development. The point being, as we've said before, that there's an overall business plan. There is then detailed design development, and a phased business plan is approved. The council the council and the HSTP have to therefore meet various conditions, planning permission, funding, vacant possession, before the value is fixed and the land transfers for work to start. And the attached, and there's a public version and a private version attached to the appendix, is the initial business plan. So that is the overall first stage business plan. You'll recall that I have said to you before that there is one certainty, that the business plan will change. You'll review it every year. Sometimes it'll be more often than that, certainly in the initial stages. And as I've said a moment ago, you will also need phased business plans that will give the granular detail of each site and what happens to it. The community works agreements, which is another legal document, 213, that is how the community works, the HNC and the like, are legally commissioned by the council to the HSTP, and that is essentially a development agreement which governs how the new civic centre and other community works are developed. The development management agreement 214, that refers to how the services that Waits provide in their role as development manager. This is the actual development role that they undertake, for which they are paid a fee as opposed to being a member of the partnership. And then 215 talks about construction exclusivity, and this is because Waits, and it was true of other bidders as well, have an integrated construction arm. One of the things that they are keen to have as part of this deal is the right to construct buildings. In their case, 100%. It isn't always, but it is a very typical bid position when firms have a integrated construction arm. And the way in which that construction exclusivity is maintained, first of all, you have to ensure that you're giving value for money. Subcontract packages are tendered, directly awarded packages are benchmarked with the supervision of the partnership supervisor, the joint venture supervisor, who will shortly be appointed. And then they have to adhere to various key performance indicators for construction, and again we sent a copy of that document out today. That is an ongoing draft. That will not be completely finalised, probably actually up till the start of construction, but certainly it's not intended to be a final draft here, but it does illustrate to you how the construction exclusivity piece will be monitored. That'll come back in business plans of the future. In terms of other KPIs, key performance indicators, as 216 says, the partnership and the partners, so the council clearly being the key one in this, will set other targets, other indicators that need to be met, and they will be set as a process of developing the business plans, ongoing negotiation, ensuring that we're monitoring the right things at the right time for each scheme. And the council set and the partnership set those based on each particular site. I've mentioned the business plan. I've explained what its purpose is. It sets out the present proposals for development for the outcomes of the HSTP's work as it stands at the moment. And as I say, it references the need to provide detailed phased business plans for each site and for their reference to Cabinet for agreement, and obviously on the weights side to the weights board. There are sections on sustainability, that's at 219. There are then sections on social value a little bit further on, and these were strong features of the weights bid, and important that it's recognised that as well as the outputs and outcomes that you get from your partnership, you also get improvement in sustainability, and you'll get a range of social value things that are produced by the partner and through the supply chain. The overall commercial deal is set out for you at 224. Obviously, this is backed up in more detail in the private portion, and that does refer to the letter from Avis and Young confirming that the very important section 123 of the Local Government Act best consideration that all local authorities must obtain for their land has been attained, and also some of you will remember that under European legislation there was a doctrine about state aid, which of course the public sector was not allowed to do. That is moving now into a new regime called subsidy control, and there is a letter in the private portion from Pinson Masons, and Avis and Young also confirm that there are no subsidy control issues in this deal. The report also refers to the opportunity to own affordable housing. There is a mechanism in the legal arrangements whereby if the council can afford it and it wishes to do so, it can purchase the affordable housing by meeting the best offer from a registered provider or housing association. And then there is a section 227 onwards on monitoring and governance, the role of yourselves as overview and scrutiny, the role of GARMS, and an important point that the council is looking at its structure. We've used the old-fashioned word in inverted commas, the client side, but it is important that the council has a team there who will monitor, not control, but monitor the activities of the partnership and make it sure that it is doing as it should. There then follow the statutory sections. This is not a risk-free exercise. That is reflected in the lengthy list of risk issues, but also there's an equally lengthy list of mitigations, and I know that you're going to ask some questions around that later. And of course, there are legal and financial implications for which we have the officers here who can pick up on that. Finally, Chair, if I may, I'll take you back to the recommendations that Cabinet will be asked to consider right at the top. Clearly, all of them are important, but I would particularly draw your attention to number 2, which approves Waits as a successful bidder. Number 3, which approves the setting up and commencement of the HSTP based on the structure set out in the report. 4 and 6 offers the necessary delegations to the Chief Executive and the relevant directors to enact the documents to make this happen. And 5 also approves the initial business plan, subject of course to what we've said about the development of phase business plans and to the certainty this will change over time. Chair, thank you. That was all I was intending to say on this occasion.
Great, thank you very much, Julian. That was very comprehensive. So my internet cut out twice during then, so hopefully that's all my cutting out gone for the rest of the evening. As normal for committee members, if you can use the hand up function in Teams to signal that you want to speak, and I will try and get through everyone. Obviously, if I don't see you, please do just unmute and say you want to speak. We're going to start with any questions around weights and operational matters. Are there any particular questions people have for weights on that? While people are thinking, oh no, Kanti, let's go with Kanti.
Hi, Sachin. Just so that, I want to be clear on this. So sort of, because effectively we're discussing a joint venture.
Yeah.
And so trying to understand the weights operational matters, because unless it's in the context of of the joint venture. I'm not really sure what are we exploring, because we haven't got any background to Waits, how it operates and how it's
That is maybe a question. Essentially, it's any question you want to ask Waits about how they will run their part of this while they are here. So, I mean, you don't have to ask any questions, or while you're thinking about that, if I just ask a question around just staffing. So on page 68 of the report of the committee report, we've got a number of staff that external support, core team, development management team. Are they all Waits staff? Bahija or Gillian?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Yes, they are all members of Waits staff. So there is a development management team with development managers dedicated to each site individually. They are then supported by a number of effectively experts in particular fields, whether that is our finance analyst teams, our sales and marketing teams, input and advice at the early stage from our construction delivery teams, and all the various sorts of other sort of functions outlined on the table. But yes, they are all members of Waits staff.
Great. And these staff are going to be advising the board, which is obviously a partnership, but the advisors are all coming from one half of the partnership. How will you ensure that the advice is impartial?
So they are to enable Waits to fulfil the services that we're obliged to fill under the development management agreement that appoints us as the development manager. So that some of that evidence for instance, on sales revenue will also be further supported by independent advice from sales agents, benchmarking of various bits of data into the wider marketplace, but it's all part of Waits fulfilling its development management services.
Great. I will just do one point before I know that Julian wants to come in, I guess, on this question. The reason I ask it is that, you know, we have this as councillors as well, that we're advised by our officers, but it's often very difficult to come to different conclusions because the full-time staff and the people doing the full-time work are providing advice. So sometimes it's very difficult to know what is being said, and that's why I do have some concern. So I know Julian wants to come in, but I wonder if Julian can answer what staff are the council going to put in to ensure that advice to the board is impartial.
Yeah, so I think there's two things just to say on this. I mean, very briefly, is there are some such partnerships where you actually staff them up with independent staff. We haven't chosen that here because it seems more effective to do this with Waits as a development management role. But in terms of assisting them in their work, those people who you would expect to be involved, your finance staff, your economic development staff, your finance staff, and that regeneration client team that I mentioned earlier, will be very much involved in advising and shaping the work with Waits. And in terms of advice to the board, of course, as well as advice to the cabinet as it considers its decisions, then the likes of your regeneration director and your lead client role for this partnership will also be advising them. There is also a debate still to be concluded, part of that review really of the client side, as to whether in terms of commerciality you retain some commercial advice in the council, which will actually help strengthen that advice as well. So it shouldn't be seen as Waits were the only people feeding the board.
Great, thank you. I'll perhaps come back to that later on. Chris and then Canty.
Thank you, Chair. This is a question I'm not sure quite where it fits in here, but it could be Waits making decisions, or it could be the partnership making decisions. Something I brought up some time ago, and someone from Waits said, "Oh, I've got my eye on that," was the whole Middlesex window glass and also all the Middlesex tiles. And they said, "Oh, we'll do something with it." Well, I'd like to know, one, what they're going to do with it. Two, has it been costed? Because to move that window is going to be a frightening cost. It's an unusual, completely unique piece of white flowers glass. Now, I don't know whether it's a joint decision or what Waits will do in their build. I don't know, but I'm just asking.
Great. Bahija, I think, made that point last time. So
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So at the moment, the designs are still to be worked through and developed for the Civic Centre. We're aware that there are a number of items within the existing Civic Centre that there's a great keenness to retain and integrate into the new design of the new Civic Centre. And as those designs are worked through, those sorts of elements like the stained glass window and the tile mural will be incorporated into that design, which will be presented further down the line.
great, thank you. Is that okay, Chris? Got
Comment on that one, but as that's going to involve a lot more costs, where's that going to fall and how is it going to land?
As the designs are worked through, the cost impacts of removing these items, safely storing them and incorporating them into the new build will be built into the costs as they're developed with the design.
Great, Canty, and then Jean.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm just trying to fit this question because it refers to our Waiteville North councillors and community. I think one of the key reasons why Waits was chosen was their commitment to working with lot of the work being done by local, contractors, the community. So I don't know what sort of commitment still stands and how are they going to sort of identify and stick to that sort of, offering.
So, Councillor Canty, so those commitments still stand within that. Some of those are enshrined within things like the business plan. As you correctly said, we've made commitments not only to local spend during the actual construction process of each of the three core sites, but also more widely around employment and skills training and support of local businesses. And we see our involvement with things like supporting local businesses to go beyond just, for instance, sort of what you would normally see as core construction activities, but helping support a wider range of businesses through things like business skills workshops. So those commitments still stand and will form part of the delivery of the HSDP.
Right, thank you for that, Bahija. And in terms of reporting, will this be sort of mentioned regularly in your reports in terms of what level of or percentage of the workforce and so on and so forth, or contract cost regularly? Would that be possible to incorporate into your reporting?
That will be incorporated into the reporting, and our teams are already working with officers within the council to develop the more detailed action plans on a site-by-site basis.
Okay, thank you.
Great, Jean.
Thank you. You might hear a dog barking in the background. She's found a hedgehog, so my apologies. I just wanted to quickly go back to Chris's question, following up on that. And I want to add to that the Middlesex Guildhall Art Collection, mostly silverware that we hold in the Civic Centre. And I have mentioned this before, and we work very hard as trustees of that collection to make sure that there was a cabinet that was suitable for moving into another building. So I'd like to know if you've made any connection with the secretary of the trust or not on that. And the other bit, and Chris I know will be very worried, and I am too on one levels, the civic portraits. As far as we're concerned, I mean, Chris's father's there as well as himself. So all the civic portraits, where are the plans for those to go? And please don't tell me you're going to stick them in a basement somewhere. Thank you.
Bahija.
Thank you. So similar to the stained glass and the tile mural, we are aware of the requirements with the Middlesex Silver collection for that to be displayed somewhere that's on public view, and also the desire to incorporate into the new design the existing civic portraits. So similar to before, as the design is developed up for the Civic Centre, all of those elements will be incorporated into it.
Can I just follow up on that, Sasha?
Yep.
We have an interest And as a result, it's nice to hear that you are incorporating it, but the value and the care and concern we have, you won't have. You're very kindly looking after it for us. But we are, you know, conservators, if you like, of the history of Harrow and political arenas, as well as the age-old one of the Middlesex Guildhall. So it would be very useful for us, and I'm sure Chris would be happy to do it, if you wanted to involve us in how that would look. I spent months and months with the Supreme Court designers, architects, before they redid the Supreme Court, looking at where things would go, where different portraits would go, and etc. And to me, that is the right way to do it when you're dealing with art collections and allied properties. So that's my request, and I would suggest we should be doing that. Thank you. Bahija, do you have a view on that?
Yep. No, I mean, I think what we want to create is a civic centre that, you know, meets the scope of what we've been asked to do, but also reflects the heritage of Harrow and successfully integrates these items that are important. So we'd be more than happy to work with the appropriate people within the council to ensure that the designs as they come forward incorporate these elements in a suitable manner.
Okay, sorry, we're not appropriate people. We are the councillors and we care. So we're appropriate. Just assume that we are between us. Thank you. Thanks for your answer, Ms. Bahija.
Sorry, I just lost connection again there, so I get right back in when that finished. Right, I see that both Julian and Sean have their hands up, so I'm going to bring in Julian and then Sean.
Sorry, Chair, very briefly, I was just going to make the point that, of course, the design of the Civic Centre will involve an extensive process of engagement with yourselves, and obviously these will be key factors that you'll need to be consulted on and satisfied that the proposed solutions are the right ones. So it'll be an ongoing process, and happy to give that assurance.
Great. Sean.
Yeah, I was just going to briefly add to that to hopefully put Jean and Chris's mind to rest. In both my previous chief executive roles, were involved in the refurbishment of two very historic town hall stroke civic centres, and I can assure you that the views and comments that Chris and Jean have made, and I'm sure which is supported by all members, is common in you know, the vast majority of councils. The civic heritage, the silver, those particular aspects of those buildings that are very much reflective of the borough's history and all those things that are created are pivotal, because if that isn't reflected in the new building, that, you know, effectively doesn't recognise and deliver a key part of what these projects are about, which is both modernising but also keeping, you know, the heart of the history and the sort of civic leadership that takes place in those organisations. And I think the other thing is to say, I know you won't. I know you wouldn't not let that happen in any event. So I think that in essence, Jean and Chris, you are very much part of the importance of safeguarding that, because ultimately members will be involved in approving the detail of the scheme and the planning application. And if that's not reflected in that, I know that won't get approved. So I think you've both got the commitment, but you've also got the safeguard as well.
Great, thank you, Sean. I'm going to move on to Stephen.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you, and thank you to Waitsford for joining us today as well. I just wanted to ask you something I noticed on page 65 next to the partnership charter, talking about a culture of no surprises, and I did want to ask, are you satisfied from Waits's point of view and from the council's point of view that there aren't likely to be any surprises coming down the track?
I think we'll take Bahija first, and then from the council point after that.
Thank you, Chair. I think we are. Is the sort of the shorter answer, Councillor Greek. I think the importance is that, there is the HSDP board that will be meeting on a monthly basis. There's a whole delegations policy that sits around that for key decision making, and we're here to work in a spirit of partnership and to work together. There will be challenges along the way, but I think it's about how we work together to resolve those in a way that works for everybody, and also fundamentally ensures that the HSDP stays true to its objectives for how it's been set up.
Great, thank you. And I see Sean wants to answer on the council.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. It's a really good question. I mean, I think the key thing is that we need to be really honest and open and say, obviously, things that will happen that I don't want to, given his passing yesterday, to do a Donald Rumsfeld, but there obviously will be clearly things that occur that is difficult at this stage to predict. I think what this is about talking about the culture within which the council and Waits will operate with each other, and that we will be open, we'll be honest, and that we will seek to ensure that we operate in a transparent way so that we don't create unnecessary issues and we get the culture right. I mean, I think that members are absolutely right to ask lots of technical questions relating to the legal framework, the financial framework, but I also think as well that if this is going to be a successful partnership, as always in all organisations, we have to focus on also getting the culture right as well, and I think this is about reflecting the importance of culture.
If I could just thank you for those answers. If I could just follow up on that, one thing that potentially is coming down the track is that we are less than a year away from local elections, so that could very well result in changes in the council priorities, in the way the council may operate, and that may include vis-a-vis the way the council might want to operate towards this partnership, and the development priorities and that sort of thing. What flexibility is there within this arrangement to account for what might happen in that vein?
Okay, I think probably have a council answer there. It's probably easier. Julian, and then Sean, but quick, short answers, please.
I mean, the answer from a technical point of view, Chair, is that the legal documents allow you the flexibility to change things. Obviously, you can change your business plan. You can then change arrangements of what you're proposing to deliver on a particular site. So you have a certain amount of flexibility. What, of course, we cannot pretend is that if you change having done work, you will potentially have some costs into this, but there is flexibility either through the business planning process or through the legal documents to change as you require. If you were to want to make fundamental changes to the structure of the partnership itself, then that is obviously more drastic. You would need to do that initially by consent, or you'd need to do it by taking some of the more drastic measures that the legals allow you, to which the same applies. You would have involved yourself in cost beforehand, but as a principle, you can change most things.
Before I bring Sean in, I just want to clarify a point Julian just made around. I mean, you say change is quite easy. My reading is actually it's going to be quite difficult because it has to be by consent on both sides. Ultimately, we heard last time we had the informal session that if the two sides can't agree, then you continue as you were before. You continue with the business plan as agreed. So if the change in political direction is such that, for instance, if well, let's just say a whole lot of independent councillors get elected and they've elected on a manifesto to only build bungalows on Poets Corner, I can't see Waits being very happy with that. That would be a democratically elected thing, but I don't think that would ever that change could never happen once this is signed.
So I'm not sure, Chair, that I actually said that change was easy. I said that change was feasible. Yeah, you know, if you take, for example, that significant example, then you will clearly have some significant cost into your existing designs, your existing approach, and such an approach would obviously raise you all sorts of issues about your own viability and what you could do and whether the scheme would ever meet the criteria. In that instance, you would undoubtedly run yourself into the potentials of having to take some of the more drastic action that I referred to. I think there will be some changes that will be easier than others. It remains true that there is flexibility in the legals to allow you to change, but you know, change will certainly come with cost.
Sean, and then
So
I'll
two things really. Sorry, two things, just sort of to reassure Stephen that obviously as part of officers' engagement with Waits, we are very clear about them understanding the context of the elections that are coming, and also that if depending on the outcome of those elections, there could be a change in priorities, etc., etc. So that's clearly communicated. I think, Chair, in part the answer to your question is I think that probably what happens in what you might describe as a more extreme circumstance, which you gave an example of, effectively what happens then is that nothing happens. It's not necessarily the case that what was originally planned happens. I think it's relatively easy, I think, to stop something that if somebody doesn't want something to happen. I think the point is that if the thing that is proposed instead of it isn't viable, that may not happen instead. So probably the default is that in a situation that you describe, you end up not actually fulfilling the potential of what's possible.
Okay, I mean, I may come back to. I do want to bring Sarah.
Yeah.
But I mean, my reading of the escalation process and how you dissolve a partnership. So in a default situation, the council will be seen as the party that's dissolved it, and there'll be a punishment. There will be a 15% premium on the cost. In that, so I'm not. My reading of that 15% premium is that what would happen is you'd have to continue with the business plan as agreed. Otherwise, the council will face huge costs. That's how I would read it. Julian, do you disagree?
So, I mean, I think there is an element in which it depends on what time you want to make your choice. Because if you were a long way down the line, then that and had started building, for example, and you then want to change, you might very well be in that situation. But in most instances, if you're going to change, you're going to change before the rest of the conditions have been met, and also you would, and in that instance, there are a relatively limited number of things in which the council can be in default, and it is really only dependent on how on the giving of vacant possession, and it all depends also on what assets are transferred. So the reality actually is that you may well, if you're going to change before you sign up a business plan and start, you may attract significantly less cost than you would if it was done at a later stage. I think I certainly would advise you, if you'd started building stuff, then just carry on and develop it out. But the penalties which you describe will be much less severe at a pre-business plan stage. I don't know whether you would want to bring Scott in on this just to reinforce this point, Chair.
We may come back to it, but I think I've abused my position as chair far too much. So I'm going to bring Sarah in now.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask a question that perhaps builds on some of the things that have already been asked around the development of a culture, the development of a relationship in the partnership, and the engagement of stakeholders. And I'm just looking at page 22 and the key performance indicators, 2.16.4, where it says the council is currently reviewing its client-side structure to ensure necessary skills and abilities to monitor performance. I just wanted to ask a few questions around that. So who's leading the review? When would the review be complete? who's responsible for actions necessary if it's determined that training is needed. And also, just finally, sorry, there was a few there, but just will councillors be involved in that continued kind of training for councillors to continue to scrutinise performance, and how will that manifest itself? Thank you.
Probably a Julian question.
Sorry, Chair, I confused my muting with my my picture. The review will ultimately obviously be led by Sean and the new director. The structure, obviously, we as your advisors have provided advice as to what we think you need, but that will ultimately be a matter for the council, which will obviously no doubt be agreed with yourselves. In terms of the conclusion, I would anticipate, and this is me speculating to some extent, but I would anticipate that structure will be in place round about the turn of the year. In the meantime, I suspect that your client side looks a bit like me. The answer on the member point and the continued training is absolutely. I mean, I think it's really important that because this is new, this is different, and I think it's really important that both yourselves as Scrutiny, clearly the board of the HSTP, and indeed others who are involved, really do get to grips with the concepts here and work with it. It's very, very important, I think.
Great, thank you, Sarah.
Thanks.
Any follow up on that?
No, that's great. Thank you very much.
Great, Candy.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just a quick follow-up on this discussion, because I mean, you just flagged up a concern there in terms of what everyone's raised. So fundamentally, as far as weights are concerned, or the partnership is concerned, because it seems obvious that if the mechanism to roll back anything is impossible, is there any sort of safeguard right now to say, hey, without a clear plan or understanding of what's going to happen politically next year, without actual planning permission, and without sort of a lot of detail being in place, would the transfer of assets be held back until all that is in place into the partnership?
Julian.
So the reality is that the transfer of assets into the partnership is most unlikely to take place before May of 2022. The current programme, which you'll have seen, suggests that the planning application for Byron will be in the early part of next year, first quarter of next year, and the planning application for Peel will then follow in the second quarter. Of course, the very first condition is a viable planning permission. So the reality is that no assets are likely to transfer this side of the election. That is a different thing from saying that work will not be done, of course, and that there will not be cost incurred. But in direct answer to your question, it's very unlikely that any assets would have transferred in that time.
Okay, thank you. So is the planning permission the main trigger, Julian, for transferring assets, or is there any other sort of conditions that?
No, I mean, there are a number of triggers. The council has to give vacant possession of the site. There has to be a planning permission. There has to be a funded scheme. So there are 4 or 5 triggers, all frankly of equal importance. But clearly you can't do it if you haven't got a viable planning permission.
Thank you.
Great. I'm going to move us on to the next issue around governance and structure. So people have questions on that. As people are thinking, can I ask around the board members? So we've got a list of board members in the business plan. Is that an up-to-date list? Julian.
It's certainly up to date from the council side. If you'll bear with me, I'll check it from the Wade side. But he just coming on.
Yeah, pretty sure.
Apologies, Chair. I think I spoke with my myself on mute there, but yes, the list there is up to date from the Waits side as well.
Okay, so that is an all-male board and almost an all-white board. Can I have comments on that?
I don't know whether Julian, whether you want to go first or whether you'd like me to.
I'm not sure I should comment on the choices of the council in appointing its board members.
Well, the administration is here. Graham or Natasha?
So, Sachin, I'm fading out here. Could you repeat the question again, please?
So the board, the HSDP board from council and Waits is all male and almost all white. So I'm just looking for whether people think comments on that.
Yeah, so we nominated 2 councillors, which was Councillor Keith Ferry and AJ, and then there was a panel to recruit the independent person out of the people that applied for the role. I think to be fair, on the Waits side, that there's been a slight change as we move forward, as people have changed their jobs and new people coming in.
Okay, I was looking for a bit more than that. But okay, on Bahija, on the Waits side.
So on the Waits side, as Councillor Henson said, we have had some changes internally in terms of our staff, which has led to changes in our board members. Whilst I acknowledge that it is a fully male board from us on the Waits side, I think it is worth noting that our overall development management team is a good mixture across the male and female, and in terms of various different diversity. I don't say criteria, almost sounds sort of pigeonholing people, but there is a range of different diversities across many different measures. Myself, the Abel Schutt, who some of you may have met at previous events, is female. Within my team, one of my 3 development managers is female, and when we spoke before about that mixture of that expert support, that is a range of males and females through the team with a variety of different diversity elements to it.
Okay, I will return to this point because I think I'm getting an explanation. I'm not getting any justification for having an all male, almost all white board. I think it's not. I know we've lost a year because of coronavirus, but we haven't lost a century. It's not really. It's 2021. Stephen.
Thank you. Yes, I mean that will sound concerning. But I wanted to ask if, from the council point of view, if councillors or residents have concerns about the way our representatives on the board vote, or any action that they've taken, or indeed things that people feel they should be doing that they're not doing, what are there any mechanisms to challenge that from the point of view of other council residents? And if so, what are they?
Julian?
So I think the first thing to remember, Chair, is that many of the big significant decisions, as you'll have seen from the delegation policy, and I always use the example of the business plan because it is the biggest and most obvious, but they are reserved to the council in any event, and therefore they will be taken by the council. There are also, as you'll again see from the delegation policy, there is a significant number of other decisions that go to the council at various levels or are passed to the board at with appropriate approvals and appropriate safeguards. So the first thing to remember is a lot of important decisions are still reserved to the council. The second thing to say is that while this is an independent company, clearly the council is a member of this, and as a member, obviously you have various rights and duties. Scrutiny obviously is one of them, and the role of the GARMS committee in terms of what you put into it and the inputs you make to it. So in that sense, reference to your own councillors would be entirely appropriate in the normal manner. Then, of course, the other thing to remember, of course, is that the council can, in the same way as you can change any other board member, any other appointment, can change its board members. Board members serve at the pleasure of the council, and while you're given a notional term, if you choose to change them, then the council still has that opportunity to do so. So there are a range of safeguards. If a member of the public or indeed a councillor believes that the decisions that are being taken by the board are not being well taken or appropriate.
Great. Stephen, did you want to come back on
that?
Yeah,
thank you. Is there likely to be any sort of protocol for how our board members should operate, or how the council manages its decisions within the context of the HSDP?
So there is every opportunity if the council wishes to do such a thing. There isn't a protocol at this moment, but you also remember, though, that there are limits to how much that should be, because this is not a controlled company. You need to be careful not to make it such. But in terms of agreeing how decisions are taken by your board members, then the opportunity to establish a protocol is there.
Okay, thank you. And just finally, will the partnership be in any way subject to freedom of information, equality, duty, that sort of thing, the sort of standards that we expect from the council?
So I believe I've answered this question a number of times, not just in this council but in others. The position, as I understand it, is that this is the partnership itself is not subject to the freedom of information and the other disclosures. Clearly, information that comes out of that partnership to the council, or indeed information that goes in from the council, is subject to this said legislation, and obviously what that means is that as a member, and as the fact that you will be dealing with information going in and out, a great amount of the information will be subject to it. I was asked the question not so very long ago whether it was legitimate to hold the partnership to a higher standard because of being the council's being a member. To which my answer was then and always would be, well, there's no harm in holding it to a higher standard, but you do need to recall this is a commercial vehicle, and much of the information that is in the partnership is undoubtedly commercially sensitive, and you run the risk of hobbling it if you are too open about it. That's a long way around of saying some of it is, some of it isn't.
It's okay, Stephen. Okay, before I bring someone else, Sean wants to come in. So, Sean, you're muted.
Apologies, Chair. The only thing I wanted to add was I think it's also worth remembering that as well as the council and Waits being in a partnership, which is effectively for the delivery of what is in the business plan, the council also has a partnership relationship with Waits, which is outside of the board structure. So as well as decisions that are made at the board, there's an awful lot of interaction that will take place between members and officers and Waits outside of the decisions that are made at the board. So there's actually quite a lot of opportunities to hold to account, influence, develop on a joint basis that overall relationship, because I think that the partnership is much broader than actually the board, which is responsible for delivering the schemes.
Great. Okay, thanks, Graham. And then Jean, and then Canty.
I just go back to Stephen's original point about how the councillors are held to account on the board. We appoint, as a council, we appoint to a number of external bodies, and they all there as representatives of the council, and so therefore they come under the governance procedures, the conduct procedures within the council itself. So if there's a complaint, it'd be investigated through that practice if they're acting in their role as a councillor as a delegate to an external board.
Okay, great. Jean and then Canty.
I wanted to reinforce the EDI aspect of the board. You know, we have responded remarkably well to Black Lives Matter, and we've extended it into looking at protected characteristics across the board, and equalities, diversity and inclusion are not reflected in that board makeup. Now, I know there are only 6 people on that board, but I'd have thought more effort might have been made to recruit others. And you know the sort of characteristics we're looking at, but also people with disability or whatever. We owe it to ourselves. It's a very important board. It's leading, I hope, from the front regarding HSDP, and therefore we need to be seen to be doing something perhaps a little bit more positive. And I thank Sashi for picking that up. There's another area I wanted to cover, but it might be the wrong place. I'm looking at the questions I put to Charlie last time around safety and safeguarding for people around the civic.
Yeah,
Shall I do that later?
Yes, please.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
I see Sean's just put his hand up. I think it probably in a response to that last point. So Sean.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to say that I've heard the points that the committee have made around this, and I'm happy to, if you like, take away those issues and have a conversation with our partner about the points that have been made. I understand where members are coming from. I think, as Bahija said, I think that actually the original board structure was more diverse, but there have been a number of changes of personnel at Waits, which has resulted in an amended board arrangement. Obviously, clearly, this is a matter for Waits and not for the council. But I hear what the committee are saying, and I'm happy to have a conversation about that. Great, thank you for that. Canty.
Yes, Sachin, thank you. I just had a couple of my own questions, but I just kind of noticed a few of the comments and where we might just be kind of getting it muddled up. So firstly, may I point out to this committee today that it is in the papers, it clearly says that the equalities impact that we have in the first part in relation to what the council does, which is now, when the joint venture is set up, the papers clearly say that it's not subject to the equalities impact that we have. So I think let's not misunderstand that. So that's very clear. And of course, that comes from the fact that it is an independent legal entity for all purposes, really. So I think it will be best, Chair, to have some sort of solid sort of points of how this safeguarding in terms of the council is. It needs to be clearly stated in the contracts, because we cannot assume that this is possible, because let's face it, GARMS and Scrutiny and all that, it's a product of scrutinizing council decisions. Once the decisions move from council to the joint venture, in all purposes, unless it's enshrined in the documents, in the agreements, we can't do anything, unfortunately. Just coming back to my question. So firstly, I just need to check with the in terms of, I know you touched on the diversity side, but I also had sort of some kind of wonderment as to sort of, how did we come to the conclusion that these are the best people to appoint to the board? I mean, was there a selection process? Were people able to apply? What skill sets were necessary? What skill sets do these appointees bring to the board that we all feel is beneficial? I know it's a political appointment, but I just thought that, did that thought process go through in that? So that's my first question. Can we deal with those two first, please?
Yeah, so Julian's got his hand up. His hand went up when you were saying your first point, but I'll give Julian on both points. I'll give Julian on the points around quality, public sector duty, and then Graham can talk about the council appointing, and then Bahija can talk about the Waits appointed to the board. Right, Julian. You're muted, Julian.
Sorry, Chair. Thank you. Yes. It is true that the partnership is not subject to the duties in quite the same way as the council, but it does, of course, remain subject to the duties that come out of the law, and the partnership has also committed, and the report and the business plan do state that, to adhering and complying with legislation in all aspects. So while the strict legal position is slightly different, we should not assume that the adherence in the partnership to the is any different. I think that's important to be clear on that point. And then just briefly on the second point, Chair, as I say, not for me to comment on the two member appointments that the council made to the board, but it is true that the independent appointment was publicly advertised, publicly applied for. A member panel carried out the interviews, and they chose the candidate for the job.
Great. And Graham on the two council appointments, and then Bahija will move on to the Waits appointments.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that it's sort of, if we'd have signed the contract back in February, we probably would have had a different board, and that, I think Bahija just said that. From the council's point of view, we it's at full council last year. Was it last year? In November, I think. That we appointed Keith and AJ to the board, and also agreed we started the recruiting process for the third person, the independent person, and then there was an interview process that took place to recruit that person, and that's how we end up with the 3 people from the council side.
Sorry, Graham. If I may, I mean, you didn't still explain what skill sets they bring on board, that they are the best people to be on the board. So I just kind of would like clarification on that, because you haven't touched on that at all.
Well, Keith, as you know, is a qualified engineer, structural engineer, town planner. He has a number of planning qualifications that sit behind him, and he's been in that field for many years. At one time, he was the most qualified planner we had in the council, so he does bring a lot of experience through that as well. And AJ, when we sought nominations from our group of who wished to apply for this role, AJ put forward a number of reasons why he was, and it was around the community side of engagement, and so it came to balance to the approach of nominations we put through.
Great. And Bahija, do you want to talk about the Waits appointments?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So with the Waits appointments, they bring a range of different skill sets to the board. So we have, for instance, Gavin Lewis, who is on there, is our finance director. So obviously has a very good understanding of the not only just the viability model, but when we also talk about in the future going out for funding for to bring the actual developments forward. On the operational side, in terms of that skill set, we have Nick Williams, who is our production director and is able to bring into the development, as we start at this very early stage, how we can make sure that the schemes are successfully and efficiently built out once we get past the point of achieving planning permission and moving them onto site. And then Andrew Savage is our head of partnerships. He has extensive experience of working on joint venture partnerships like this and has worked on 5 various ones of these over the last sort of 10 to 12 years, and brings that good experience of how we can work collaboratively with yourselves to make the HSDP a successful venture for both of us. I do have obviously recognised the points made this evening, and we very much welcome having the conversation that Sean mentioned earlier on.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. If I may just finish my question that I have next about governance. So in the structure, we noticed that that there is the main LLP, the joint venture between the council and Waits, and then under that you got 3 other entities, which again are in turn owned by the LLP and a nominee company. So could someone please explain then the need to have 3 more entities under one joint venture, and then another nominee, and who is this nominee, why is it required, and how are they completely independent, or what's their role? I mean, could we have an oversight on that, please?
Yeah. Julian.
Well, I was going to say, would you like to bring Scott in, Chair, and he could explain this for you?
Which goes Scott.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so the reason for the nominee is because of the nature of a limited liability partnership. because a limited liability partnership requires 2 members. So the difference there between a company structure and an LLP structure is that if we had a company as the top vehicle and it wanted to incorporate a subsidiary, it would just incorporate a wholly owned subsidiary. But because an LLP has to have 2 members, the top LLP can't just incorporate a wholly owned subsidiary, it needs a nominee. That's purely the reason, and the nominee is just purely that, a nominee, so it doesn't have any impact on the governance. The rationale for the having the subsidiary vehicles is common throughout development vehicle structures to enable hopefully non-recourse structures in relation to different developmental aspects to be delivered through different legal structures.
Okay. Scott, if I may just kind of follow up on that. So in terms of those 3 structures, just understanding, because we are transferring assets and liabilities, which is your debt and so on. So where is that being held? I mean, is that held by the top LLP, which owns everything, or what element is shifted to the 3 other underlying sort of subsidiary LLPs? I mean, in terms of, is that just the construction element, just costs in and out? They have no liabilities, risks, or responsibilities, or assets. Can you explain that a bit more, please?
So I suppose that there are 2 elements to that. The subsidiaries will have, certainly the land subsidiaries will have liabilities and obligations in there, but also the top vehicle will have liabilities and obligations in it, because it effectively owns it, and some of the funding will flow down through the top vehicle and profits will flow up through the top vehicle.
So, and sorry, the land, where is it sitting once it's transferred?
So the land, when it's transferred, will sit in the subsidiary vehicles.
Right. So each site has its own company, subsidiary company, and the land will sit there. And the top LLP will not have any sort of rights over that. Is that correct?
Well, the top LLP will have rights over it, because when you say rights, the subsidiary LLPs sit within the group structure, and the top LLP is the holding entity of that group structure, and it has a finance relationship as well as a governance relationship with those subsidiary vehicles. So they don't operate independently of the top vehicle.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Great. Are there any other questions on this? Otherwise, I'll move us on to look at the business plan, excluding the finances. I separated out the finances because I knew the finances might take time by itself. So I wanted to see if there are any questions around the business plan. Yes, Stephen.
Thank you very much. Coming from a planning background, I'm take quite a lot of interest in how the schemes are going to look, what we can expect, and I note that in the business plan you've got various indicative plans of various aspects of the scheme. One thing I didn't see was details such as size mix, so how bedroom numbers of the homes, how many are sort of family sized, the design, and also things like parking spaces and that sort of thing. Do you have any information on that?
It took us till 7:47 to get into parking spaces, but there we are. Who's going to answer that one? Peter.
Thank you. So in terms of things like unit mix, Councillor Green, you are correct that isn't yet fully determined. We, as you've seen from the business plan, we have some indicative master plans for each of the sites, but that is, as you quite rightly say, you know, is subject to go through that planning process. There is consultation that will need to be carried out with the public consultation process during that planning process as we lead up to making a planning submission, and also engagement with the planning officers within the council to make sure that the mix for each of these schemes is developed in a way that's appropriate. And then in terms of your comment also then on parking spaces, that's really at a sort of similar stage again as these master plans are developed and worked through. From that, we will be able to determine what the element of parking will be on each of the developments.
Stephen.
Yeah, thank you. One of the reasons I asked about, particularly about unit sizes, is I noted on page 13 of the agenda, it's got when it mentions the objectives of the and the council's ambitions for the regeneration, it talks about tackling overcrowding, and we know that overcrowding is a particular issue. It's been a particular issue over the last year because there's quite a lot of evidence now that there's a correlation between overcrowding and COVID hotspots. And obviously the major way to avoid overcrowding is to build sufficient family homes. So I'm just wondering if if to really to just to get an idea then of how can we know whether the schemes are going to meet that objective if we don't have that information already in the business plan.
So I think as Julian mentioned earlier, more detailed phase business plans will be brought forward for each of the schemes. It is worth noting that it is proposed to provide some houses on both the development at Poets and also at Byron. But I do note your points in making sure that the mix that's developed up is suitable.
Thank you very much, and I do think that's very important. Also, looking at building heights, we've got some quite tall buildings that are sort of indicated, and some of them going up to 18 stories. I mean, we on the Peel House site, going up to 18 stories for the residential and other heights elsewhere. How locked in are we to those building heights? So once the contract is signed, are we kind of locked into that in terms of that's the only way the finances can work, or is there some flexibility, for example, if that turns out to be not desired as a result of consultation or something like that?
I suppose the answer is it's a bit of a mixture, in so much as these are indicative master plans at this point. They do need to be developed through by the team and worked through, and also the balance of that is making sure that all of the schemes are able to come forward in a viable manner, which means achieving a balance across the sites of the number of units of homes that are delivered.
I mean, thank you. I mean, because one of the concerns I have is obviously one of the risks that have been identified is planning risk, so obviously some of these things they're a risk of not being delivered if you can't get planning permission. Would it not have been a good idea to have actually produced some planning briefs in advance of signing the contracts and actually produce them, got them, written them as SPDs, had proper, full public consultation on them before we went into signing signing up for this contract, so that you can actually minimise that risk before you go into this venture, and also have a good idea of what people think of these plans and give people the opportunity to be consulted on them before we actually sign up for a lot of this stuff that then viability depends on it and all that sort of thing.
I wonder whether that is probably a better answer for the administration rather than for the HEJO.
Yeah, no, I was trying to
Yeah.
put my to answer that one. I think you've got to remember what this report and what it's all really all about. It's there to go into a partnership to do all the work that you've just spoken about, Steve. It's saying that we can't do it on our own. We could have gone out as stayed within the council, brought in loads of people, employed them directly, spent lots of millions of pounds on it, taken all the risk ourselves and developed something. But it's about building a partnership with someone to actually take that journey with us. So they're bringing that skill set into the council, into the partnership, and we're putting land and people in as well. And from that, we can then start, as has just been said, you then start looking about how you get into the finer detail around the planning, those and the planning briefs that were fit behind that. We have to go out to consultation anyway, as you know, for any planning application that goes through. It has to meet within the London Plan guidance, and we don't want to go and spend 2 years going through an SPD, because I think you're just kicking the thing further down the road, and you would never build anything that sort of idea or that sort of approach. So I think there's a lot of experience coming in from Waits on this, and they have been doing some work, already preliminary work, but it's better to be in the contract about it, so they don't lose out and we don't lose out. And that's when you spoke about relationships earlier on, is having that level of trust in there to do that.
I mean, thank you for that. I mean, the issue is, though, that in doing the consultation after we sign the contract, is that in signing the contract we commit ourselves to certain things and certain contours and certain expenditures and a whole financial schedule that is dependent on certain things being delivered on these sites. So, for example, if we need 18-story buildings on certain sites to make things work, if then you're then going into a consultation without really the flexibility to change a lot of that stuff because it's already signed up to. So what I'm really asking is, how meaningful would any consultation really be after we sign the contract compared to being able to establish some of these things in advance?
The criteria we do have is around affordable housing, which we bring into that brings in for Harrow residents. And to do that, you need to build a number of properties to be able to afford to do it. So it's got to be costed in right across the board. And at the end of it all, we do get a share of the money back. That if anything's left over, we can bring that back in property. But you can't just you just keep going around in circles if you keep deciding what you want to do, because you'll just change your mind every 6 months and you never build anything, Stephen. You've got to go into you've got to have that discussion with them to see what can be built. They're going to collectively, we're going to go through and set out parameters of what we want, which is, well, apart from a new civic centre, is around affordable housing. But we want decent homes as well. We don't want something that's stuck up 60s style and in blocks of concrete. We want something that's actually going to be appeasing to the eye, as someone told me once. But the fact remains that you've got to start, you can't just keep putting things off. You've got to start asking people to see what the design looks like, and then they can come forward and we can then go into planning permission. And I know you'll probably turn up to the planning committee and probably say something about it there, but then we can decide what we want to do on that one, and then we can go and say if we want to change it all again. So
okay, I'm going to bring, I think we've got to the end of that point. I'm going to bring Sean in and then Julian. Sorry, I've gone with rank on the officers.
I know my place, Chair.
It's all right. Julian can sweep up, Chair, when I get something wrong. That's what he's paid for. Now, I just think in terms of Stephen's point, I think it's important to obviously remember, and obviously it is now some while ago, that obviously one of the key officers who was part of the assessment of the bids was our chief planning officer. So that's not. That's not saying that means that whatever's put forward and the arrangements, automatically do everything in terms of planning permission. Far from it. But it is about ensuring the context of what's put forward, has a reasonable chance of fitting in with London and local planning policy. I think it is important to say, because I think it's important to be open, that if you are going to deliver this number of this number of units, which is what the council wishes to do, and this proportion of affordable housing, that one of the things that will inevitably be required to do that is going to be scale and mass, and I don't think that that's ever been not clear. The degree to that, what it looks like, and ultimately what the public consultation and the planning committee make of the detail of that is clearly something going forward. But I don't think that the reality of this has ever been anything other than, in order to deliver this amount of property to tackle the housing numbers and the housing crisis that Harrow has, to deliver the amount of affordable housing that was in the council's expectations. And the chair will, I'm sure, at some point in the meeting be beating us up for why we haven't got 50% affordable housing rather than the numbers here. There is an inevitability that brings with it aspects that will push height, size, and massing. That has to sit within the planning policy. But I don't think that's ever been a secret. I think it is an inevitability of the policy decision that the council's made.
Okay, I'm going to bring Julian, and then we're going to questions. I saw Dan had his hand up, and then
Three very brief points, Chair. The first is just to echo what has been said by others, that it is important that you have a commitment and a contractual commitment with your partner to devote the resources and the effort to getting to the conclusion and doing that consultation. Second point is that consultation will be ever so meaningful. You as the council will want it to be meaningful, and to be fair, Waits both at bid and in the business plan have committed to that, to some extent it defines the nature of their approach to the partnership. The final point is that, of course, as Sean says, and as Stephen asked the question, what flexibility is there? Well, there is flexibility. As I said earlier, the business plan can change. You can change what you're going to do. But the driver for this issue is not the contractual signature. The driver for this issue is viability. And as Sean says, to achieve what you are going to do, you're going to need scale and mass. But there is flexibility, but it's what you're going to do to your land value and your returns.
Great. I'm going to bring Dan in, then Canty. Dan. No. Yeah.
Yeah, so my question was just around the consultation, and I know there's a lot in the report about, rightfully so, how to get a breadth of opinion and to consult meaningfully with groups and members of the community that don't normally find it more difficult to do that, and that's good. But I just wondered how will the partnership know that has been a meaningful consultation? Will there be tracking where the consultation results are coming from? And is there a target of certain groups that we want to achieve to make sure that we don't just listen to the same old people around what they want?
Julian.
I was going to suggest Bahija in this instance.
Yeah, Bahija.
Thank you. So to answer on that, there will be a detailed consultation strategy put in place. We have already done some initial work, sort of identifying what some of those groups that we would engage with, whether those are local resident groups, local businesses, local schools, and sort of more general sort of academic institutions, but also working with the officers from the regeneration team and the economic development team to make sure that those lists of who we engage with are comprehensive, and that, as you said, that there is a track kept of that engagement with them to make sure that we are targeting and engaging with as wide a spread of the community as we're able to.
Can I just come in there again, Chair, just around, I think it'd be, and you may disagree, but I think it'd be really good for this committee to see those KPIs once they're developed through the consultation and the consultation plan, and just kind of have sight of how well that is going, if that is possible.
Yes. Lots of nodding, so it's good to hear. Is any other follow-up down on that? No, in which case, Candy.
Thank you, Chair. Just in terms of consultations, I mean, we've been hearing verbally, and I don't doubt anything that's been said. My concern lies around what's on sort of page 65 regarding the partnership charter. Now, we speak about consultation, but the charter says it only mentions, and I read that out to you and see what you think of that sort of. It says engage in effective joint stakeholder management, including with our future residents. It doesn't mention the current residents, so I'm just wondering why they have been missed out of there. Why the future residents are more important than current residents? That's the first question. And in terms of the business plan, I just would like 2 areas of certainty, sort of, which, although we're being told, but actually don't mean anything. I'm talking about the business plan. Number one, I cannot see how the business plan that's been given to us is complete. So first question is, what should be the key items in that business plan? And number 2, we speak about the business plan being flexible. So I think there needs to be clarity about which sections, give that business plan flexibility, because it's, well, next to impossible for the whole business plan to be flexible. So we need to understand clearly which bits in the business plan actually give us flexibility. So I don't know if anyone's noticed that and has any observations on that.
So Bahidra, if I can bring you in on your point about the charter,
Yeah.
and then we can start on the business plan, and I'll bring Julian in on that as well.
Yeah, thank you. I think the wording in the charter is not meant to exclude existing residents. I think they would be seen as part of the stakeholders to be engaged with. It was more talking about how we successfully, when we talk about future residents, about how we successfully integrate new residents into these developments and ensure that we're able to build these positive and sustainable communities.
Okay, and on the flexibility of the business plan, did you want to comment on that or answer at that point?
Did you want me to take that, Chair?
Well, I mean, it is a joint business plan between.
Yeah, true.
And so it'd be good to have an answer from both.
Okay, so I suppose in terms of flexibility of the business plan, it's as Julian said, there will be points where the business plan through the council's governance is brought back through, and there will be opportunities as these phased business plans come forward, and also the annual reviews of the business plan for the council as a member of the HSDP to input into that and the direction of travel within those business plans.
But he just sort of, sorry, I know we're not sort of concrete on every level, but it's just sort of kind of getting a feel for any indication to say, the flexibility sort of, are there any specific areas we can say here with any certainty today to say these are the 2-3 areas that's going to give the flexibility, and this is the reason why.
I mean, I think, we've got, for instance, the things like the social value commitments that are being developed through with officers from the council. We have the various kind of commitments within there at the moment in terms of how the developments and the master plans will evolve from each of those schemes. And I think as the point Julian raised earlier about ensuring that changes that are made ensure that all of the schemes still remain viable.
Julian, you had something to add to that, please?
Yeah, I think the way I would explain this is that the business plan as it currently stands, and you're quite right that it is the initial overall business plan. As we said earlier, the detail and the granularity, bedroom mix and some of those things will be at the next level of the phase business plan. But the business plan as it stands today is a reflection of the council's ambitions and the partnership's response to those ambitions based on initially the bid and what has happened since. The flexibility is that if you chose, and I mean, we can get into an argument about procurement and stuff, but as a principle, if you chose, you can change that business plan and you can say we want more housing. The flexibility is in what you choose, and the flexibility is in what can go back to the council for decision. It isn't so much the document itself that is flexible, it is that the document is a response to the circumstances that the council has prescribed. I mean, the obvious example, which we talked about earlier, is if somebody changes their view of the HNC, or I mean, I certainly wouldn't advise it, but to pick up on Sachin's example, if you said you were going to deliver the whole site in bungalows, in theory, you could do that. The flexibility is in what comes out of the council's objectives as opposed to the document itself. I think that's the important thing.
Okay, Gillian. Now, thank you. So I understand now, and it looks like we haven't done any flexing. So I suppose we can touch on it in the financial side of things probably, and see how we can fund that up in the future. Thank you. Great.
Are there any other questions on this? If not, I've got a question, and it's for Graham or Natasha. It's for the administration. One of the things, I mean, I've introduced the HSDP every time I've spoken about it as the biggest contract the council has signed while as the time I've been a councillor. So it's something big. And what I was a little bit surprised about was how, when you look at the business plan, it focuses a lot on just the HSDP, but not the wider. We've got a borough plan with 8. Well, as a committee, we said there's 8 is far too many, but anyway, there are 8 in the trapezium, 8 priorities, and it would have been really good to see the largest contract the council has signed in 11 years to have a bit more around implementing council-wide policies. The word inequality is part of 2 of the priorities of the council. The word inequalities outside of the EQIA in the report is mentioned once in the whole of the report. So I just want to understand from the administration, it feels to me there's a lack of vision around how this is going to be used to deliver the administration's aims in the borough plan. I just want to understand why that's the case.
I think what it is, Sachin, this is as we said earlier on, this is the 3rd report in a series of 3, where we're and this one is to actually sign the contract with a major partner as such to build the development partnership. All the tendering documents have gone through the process, and have mentioned the borough plan, and all the way when we've advertised that, all the way when we've advertised and promoted the right from the beginning of this, which says how it fits in. Some of the things around increased housing or affordable housing was a key one that we put in there. Affordability was another one we put in there. But it also talks about that brings stuff in improvements into businesses and also into communities and also into jobs coming into the area. And all that was set out in all the original documents. I think, and I'm suffering from it now. I think people are really tired. If we had no COVID in the way, we would. I'm not making this as an excuse, but we would have done this last year, and we probably would have done a long, lengthier report. The team were on here tonight. Most of them was on conference calls with them over the weekend, and you're sort of double handling stuff to make sure we can get the because we have to finish this process of a business partner. You are right. We could have we will promote this a lot better as we go through the process later on. But this decision is: do we want to sign an agreement with Waits as part of the partnership agreement?
Okay. On that point, I'm going to move us on to the next topic, which is the monitoring and finances and business plan. At this point, I think we're probably at the point where Bahija, there's probably questions are going to be more at the council side. So I think, Bahija, if you do want to take a break and join us again, I think Julian will let you know if in the part 2 section we do need Dean. But thank you very much, Bahija, and thank you to the whole Waits team for everything you've done. Thank you. And on that note, are there any questions around the finances, the monitoring, KPIs. Canty.
Yes, Chair, thank you. I just have a number of questions, and hopefully I've touched on this before, so it won't be too difficult. Yeah, my concern is around the fact that I do not believe I've seen anything more added to the business plan today, which we haven't seen. I was expecting a much more detail in this plan, and one of the areas I think it falls short, in my opinion, is the financing. So number one, there are no assumptions that I can see on what basis this arrived, and I'm going to give you my reasoning behind why I say that. So it'd be useful to know what assumptions are in place in this model, and we can touch on that. And secondly, I say this because if you read across the whole report, from start to finish, one thing stares at you, obviously, is the fact that we are in a stage where nothing is certain. So I just fail to understand how have we been saying that this is going to be cost neutral, going to produce a large surplus, on the basis that each and every section says we might build 6 to 10 stories, we might build up to 18 stories. So there is no basis of justifying what you're saying, because nowhere in the papers today or previously does it say this is your optimum build sort of quantity or breadth of build to arrive at that point. So I get no confidence from these papers to say I've learned anything new that I should have. It hasn't happened. My third concern is around what I raised last time, and I failed to understand the reconciliation, because we were assured by Addison Young they were going to do a reconciliation backwards to why they're costing 692 from 653, even after making a huge saving and reducing the HNC sort of status and the sort of look of it. So I've got those 3 areas which really bother me right now.
Okay, there's a number of questions there. I imagine there'll be a number of people we want to get involved, Dawn and Ishdeep, as Addison Young were mentioned, but Julian, do you want to start?
Well, Chair, I was going to suggest you brought Dawn and Ishdeep in, certainly in terms of dealing with the assumptions and reconciliation. I was just also going to make the point that I sense we may veer on the edge of public and private, and just encourage a degree of caution.
The point heard. We will have a part 2 session if there are any things we do, but I am keen to stay in part 1 for as long as possible, because this is a topic that Harrow residents should be able to hear about. So Dawn, on if you can, obviously staying in part 1, but Dawn, can you answer any of those points?
Yeah, I think I'll start off on the modelling assumptions. The modelling is based on the details that are in the business plan, so it's based on the numbers that are quoted. It's based on the build cost. We've got contingencies and such in there. So I think, we can always pick them out and make them a little bit more explicit if that would help. But I think it is fair to say that in effect the business plan, that the budget is the financial expression of the business plan. I think if I'm going to ask Ishdeep to come in, but I do think, to be fair, I do think it was said that we would do that a reconciliation would be provided between, I think it was the bidder and final stage. So if that hasn't been done, then apologies, and that would need to be done. I don't know if that has come out yet, Julian. In terms of if I'm being honest, I'm not, because the second point that Councillor Abadia raised was once again talking about cost neutrality, and I'm not quite sure if we can really add anything to cost neutrality in terms of what we've already said. If I'm being honest.
Dawn, you're trying to avoid the question, because I say from the papers I don't get certainty, because when you say cost neutral, so you need to say, okay, I'm building 10 stories, I'm building 50 units, and I'm building 100 units.
Okay.
Multiply by this, and this is the cost. Okay. So that is certainty. Okay? What I'm just saying, the papers, which I clearly understand at this point why we're saying that, it says we might build between 6 to 10 stories, we might build between 5 to 8 or up to 18 floors. Yeah. That combined with the lack of detail in terms of the assumptions and the modeling because we've seen gross figures everywhere on the tabulations, which is fine on their own, that makes sense. We are a committee here being asked to sort of scrutinize something. So yes, I know you're experts, so we are scrutinizing something that I cannot check myself as a layperson to say, against what do I check this? What is my control? Because I haven't got any assumptions, I haven't got any certainty, and I just cannot agree with these figures to say, that what we are saying is fundamentally met, be it, cost neutrality or that there'll be a surplus. I can't say with any certainty with the information I have in front of me.
Do you want to do it now? Come back in, or
so Chair, just to help on a couple of points. And first of all, the reconciliation or the explanation for the difference between the bid and the thing was sent out at the weekend. My apologies that was later than it should have been, but nonetheless it was sent out at the weekend. The numbers point. I mean, I'm just looking at the public portion of the business plan. And there are a couple of things that strike me in terms of the answer on this question. And I'm looking, for example, at 5.3 Byron Quarter deliverables. Well, it does say circa, I agree, but it's fairly clear that it's circa 340. So, given the stage we're at in terms of design and costing, that seems a fairly substantive number to me. Of course, the building heights is a range. It doesn't say there'll be 3 to 10 in the sense of we don't know. It's saying that we're proposing a range from 3 to 10. There's an element of uncertainty because of the design process, because of the need for consultation, and because obviously one wants to have a resemblance of flexibility, but we're talking about 340 homes here, and no doubt within the vagaries of the planning system, it'll ultimately be around that based on this current model.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Julian, it doesn't specify in any of the projects or sites what is your optimum break-even point. It doesn't. So I'm saying on that basis, it is impossible to say whether we agree or disagree or the scrutiny agrees to that. It's just impossible, in my opinion.
I think probably that's one for Ishdeep. I'm not sure I quite understand the point, so perhaps bring Ishdeep in, Chair, if you would. Ishdeep.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. As Julian has pointed out and Dawn has pointed out, I guess, well, first thing to say, I mean, obviously, I can't comment on the information and the level of information that's been provided, but clearly what's been provided is there to see. In terms of how that kind of stacks up to being the optimum position, Waits and other bidders throughout the procurement process were set a task to say these are the parameters that the council would like the bidders to work within, things such as affordable housing, a Harrow New Civic, delivered at a cost neutral position. And through that process, they produced what was the optimum solutions based on the designs and the other socioeconomic benefits that the schemes would bring. So while I appreciate, Councillor Abadi, you may not have seen the actual model and the numbers that sit behind that, in terms of the optimisation based on the current parameters that the council have set, Waits have tried to produce that, and it does meet cost neutrality given the definition that the council has set. It does give you your affordable housing percentages in terms of local policy compliant basis, but clearly this is a high level still business plan. The designs need to be developed and built out. The unit mixes, as we've discussed, need to be defined, and clearly at that point you'd be further optimising the scheme. I don't think anybody would say here that this is a fully optimised scheme, but it is a basis to progress and make decisions to, as Councillor Henson has said, to progress with this partnership and work alongside Waits to optimise further.
Yeah. So Ishdeep, I understand what you're saying, but I'm just saying I don't deny that there are higher level sort of plans. But for the sake of these papers, you're asking us to scrutinize something you've done, okay? So either I sit here and say, oh, you've done it, so it must be correct, or I'm going to put some effort into say, can I just replicate it at a simple level? Unfortunately, I can't. Okay. So Julian says he sent us a recommendation on Sunday. It was quite late, but I haven't seen anything, or if anything he sent doesn't allude to anything. So if it's not done, just say it isn't done. What you can provide, just say what you can provide at a level we can understand. So it's no point us talking to each other and exchanging ideas where I just fail to see what you're saying or disagree with you entirely. So Chair, I'd rather we be told that what we're going to be provided in the situation. So this is what I understand. And my understanding is that I don't understand how this is possible.
Ishdeep. I'm not sure we're going to get very much further. So Ishdeep, and then you might move us on.
Yeah, I mean, just to respond back to those points, Councillor Bardi, when we last had the conversation, you asked for the reconciliation. I did promise that we would provide that. As Julian has said, that the information was circulated around over the weekend, and apologies, that was slightly later. But in terms of the explanation, basically, I can share that now without going into part twos. But fundamentally, what we were looking at in terms of the September report was very much focused on what the outcomes were for the 3 sites. So what the HSDP would be delivering for Poets Corner, Byron Quarter, and the PRS element of Peel Road. What the current business plan is showing is the entirety of all the activities that the HSDP will be responsible for. So it includes the cost for the Harrow New Civic. It also includes the cost for the affordable housing units that the council are seeking to deliver on Peel as well. So there is a difference in terms of what was reported there versus what's being reported now. The September report was very much focused on what the council's sites were. This is the holistic HSDP business plan, and that is the information that Julian circulated over the weekend, but more than happy to go into more detail if that would be helpful.
Okay. Chair, sorry, I don't want to take too much of your time, but if I could get that email again, because I can clearly say I haven't seen anything that I am looking for that Julian has sent, unfortunately. So if I could have that, and if I could come back on it if I have to after receive that information. Thank you.
We'll send it again, Chair.
Great, thank you, Stephen.
Thank you very much. I noted on page 36 of the agenda, it says that the council's peak debt requirement is reached in 2029 at 30.7 million. Now, I thought we'd previously been told that the peak debt was going to be 44 million. So I'm just wondering if it's possible to explain that discrepancy.
Dawn.
The peak debt position that you refer to is what is the peak debt for the council in terms of the potential borrowing that we'll have to take on for the investment in the HSDP and the Civic Centre, and that's what's detailed in the cash profile appendix. I think the 44 million relates to the peak debt in the HSDP. Is that correct, Julian? I think.
Yes, that's correct. The peak borrowing of 44 million. This is at 224.5. This relates to the HSDP itself, not to the council.
So we've got two sets of figures, because we've got the financial implications for specifically for the council, which was detailed in the report, and then obviously we have the financial implications for the LLP, the HSDP LLP, and they're both different figures.
Okay. I was okay. Well, I mean, I thought we'd understood that it was 44 was for the council, but thank you for clarifying that. The other thing I just wanted to pick up on is we were hearing earlier about how KPIs are going to be set. Why haven't we set any KPIs already?
So I think there's two answers to that, Chair. As I say, I circulated today the draft KPIs for the construction exclusivity piece, which, though not agreed, are under development. And of course, you can change them, as I said earlier, right up to the point at which you care to start construction. The other point is because it is important to set your KPIs based on the granular development of each specific site. So, for example, clearly we will be looking to monitor performance. Some of them are going to be self-evident. There'll be time, there'll be cost, but there'll obviously be quality measures, and there'll be customer satisfaction measures. But it's important to shape those in the full knowledge of the detail of what you're trying to achieve. So it's a matter of when is the most timely point at which doing them, and that really will come out of each individual business plan for each site, rather than a more general at this point.
Stephen, you're muted.
Sorry, yes. Thank you. I mean, that makes sense in terms of obviously not wanting to set all the KPIs, but are there not some that you would want to set at the outset, in terms of how the overall the partnership should deliver, what it should deliver for itself, what it should deliver for the council, what it should deliver for Waits even? Isn't it quite odd not to have any at the outset?
I see what you mean. Yeah, well, the board is working up those that it would want to monitor itself. I mean, there is the opportunity, of course, here for you yourselves to suggest those, and indeed for Cabinet to suggest those. I mean, again, clearly, one of the key issues for the council will be performance against the financial implications. But this is the setting of KPIs in ventures of this nature is a ongoing basis, because some will become more important and less important over time. But I think it's fair to say that if there are particular KPIs that you as Scrutiny would like to see monitored, the opportunity is there to say so.
Thank you. I mean, I'm sure we can all think about that. I'm just wondering, has the council itself got any KPIs for the HSDP, for how it's going to monitor the HSDP at the moment? Because I would have thought the council would have had some idea itself without, necessarily prompting and taking ideas from us.
Well, as I said earlier, and I certainly said this at the stage 1 report in September, the council will inevitably monitor financial performance. It will inevitably monitor delivery against time and against the outputs. Clearly, you can't set the outputs at this point until you have finally agreed them through the schemes. There'll be a customer satisfaction KPI down the line, because at the end of the day, these homes are going to be built for people, and their satisfaction will be important. I think we would probably take from some of the questions earlier a good need to monitor the consultation and the spread and reach of that. So I think it's fair to say we have plenty of ideas, but they are not firmly set yet, as I said.
But I appreciate that not all of it is necessarily going to, that some of these things might emerge further down the line. But the idea that the council is about to sign a major contract, possibly the biggest, one of the biggest contracts ever signed, and not have some KPIs of its own in mind at the outset, I don't know. It sounds very odd. I mean, it sounds quite lackadaisical. I don't understand why would anybody go into a major contract like this without having some kind of monitoring criteria at the outset for what it wants to get out of this contract?
Chair, could I respond
on this point? There we are. We're in unison, Sean. Go ahead.
So Stephen, what I would do, I think, is that, because I think your point is a good one, but I think it misses, in my view, the difference between what I would describe as a strategic KPI and a set of detailed KPIs. So I think the council's been really clear about what it wants to achieve here. The council wants to achieve a large number of new homes. It wants to achieve at least 40%, and I'll say at least 40% before the chair corrects me, of affordable housing. And in terms of the council's measure, including the construction of a new civic centre, that needs to be cost neutral. And as you will have seen within the detail of the bid and everything, that this delivers large amounts of social value, all of which was shared with the Scrutiny Committee and included in the previous reports. So I think it's really clear about what the council's high-level strategic objectives are, which you are quite right to say it's important that we demonstrate, to deliver and clarify, and would reinforce that. My sense is what Julian's talking about in terms of KPIs is much more about where you go down once you've got the detail of a scheme into the next level of detail. And I think the point is, you're absolutely right. If we didn't know what the purpose of this was, that would be a failure. I think what we're talking about here is the difference between what we're trying to achieve strategically overall through the HSDP, and what, when you get to the detailed scenario, as Canty talked about in terms of what happens on bar and quarter, what a set of KPIs might be around that. I think my sense is we're talking about two quite different things, and I think we absolutely have the former. I think it is the latter that's more to be developed.
I mean, thank you for that. I mean, when you say this is what we want to achieve, and you talk in those broad terms, what I don't understand is why you wouldn't then go and set those as KPIs, because then, you know, if this is really what the council wants to achieve, then it has to be quite it has to be, you know, quite effective in monitoring these things from the outset, because otherwise it's, you know, it's how is the council going to know that it's going to achieve these things? How is it going to report progress? How are we as councillors and the public going to know how we're doing against those objectives? So, you know, it just seems strange that we wouldn't make those as monitoring indicators from the outset and work that all up and measure that.
I suppose, Stephen, and I'm happy to go away and talk about this in terms of how it's presented, but I guess, and this might be too much of an assumption, I guess that has already baked into those things that have already been approved. So what we're talking about here is that what we have already done, what has already been scrutinised and what has already been agreed, captures those high-level indicators that I've just described. So they are there, and that is the test against which the administration and scrutiny will quite rightly hold that to account. That's transparent, it's clear, it was part of the bid, etc., etc. If it would be helpful, and I can see the point, to recodify that in order that people are clear that that's what the purpose of the HSDP are before we take the report back to the Cabinet, that's absolutely fine. Perhaps it's been too implicit in the presentation because that's already been approved. No issue at all about making sure that's reflected more strongly in the final report that goes to the Cabinet, because that's absolutely what we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Stephen, sorry, I'm gonna move us on. I suspect when we come up with recommendations that there will be a clear recommendation of this committee for that to happen. I'm going to move us to Angela and then to Canty. Angela.
Okay, thank you, Chair. My question is on a slightly different issue. Now, it's really important that sort of the project is completed on or close to budget as far as excuse me, is possible. Now, I've noticed you've mentioned that an allowance has been made for cost inflation at 2.5%. Now, the question is, on what have you based that, and what provisions have you made for the fact that in the future this could change and could increase significantly? I'm not aware of any large-scale developments where sort of you've actually come in on budget. So on what have you based the cost inflation, the 2.5%, and what provisions have you made to accommodate the fact that there could possibly be a greater increase in the future than of 2.5%? Thank you.
Great, thank you. Julian.
Ishdeep, I think, Chair, if I may.
Yep, Ishdeep.
Thank you, Chair. So fundamentally, there's two aspects to this. In terms of the forecast inflation, Waits have received professional advice from one of our competitors. I won't name them, but they've got professional advice from professional advisors who are in this space, who are forecasting both house price inflation but also cost inflation as well. And they've provided a profile of inflation over a 5 to 6 year period, which is consistent with the 2.5% assumptions that Waits have then included within the financial model and underpinning the business plan. We've then extrapolated that 2.5% post that 5-6 year period, because clearly forecasting anything further in the future is not going to be an exact science, far from it. In terms of additional allowances, the council and Waits have both worked alongside their advisors to understand what some of the key cost risks may be, in particular things such as legislation that might be coming down the line, for example, high-rise levies that may be imposed, and risk allowances have been made for that on top of those inflationary. And also there is development contingency that has been included, as you would ordinarily expect within a development such as this. So those are kind of the two responses to that.
Okay, thank you for that. So realistically, we have no definite idea as to sort of how much extra we are going to be required to input into this project in the future. I realise that you've made predictions and you've consulted all of those experts in the field, but we still have to bear in mind that the possibility of having to spend a great deal more than budgeted for is quite evident. All right, thank you. Thanks.
Great. Okay. Candy.
Yes, thank you, Chair. A couple of quick questions. In terms of the sort of community sort of thing, public information, just understanding that in terms of this project, at what point is the Harrow residents going to find out that, you know, this is what you're doing, this is what it's going to cost, this is what are the benefits it's going to bring to you? When is that kind of communication going out? And secondly, I'm just wondering if, I know Julian's mentioned a few times he's been sending stuff, including today. Have I just been missed out of his email circulation? Because I don't seem to be getting anything from Julian, including today. Thank you.
The email today would have come from Andrew. It was part of the second supplemental.
Right. Okay.
Julian, do you want to comment?
Well, obviously, the reports as they currently stand, in terms of the detail available at present, is in the public domain. In terms of the going out to consultation, the programme that is now being worked up will start from the beginning of September. During that design period, there will be consultation. Clearly, the financial implications will be reviewed again in the detailed business plan, and you know, Waits have set out the lengthy programme of public consultation that will be involved in each site. So, I mean, in essence, the short answer to that is it starts from the beginning of the September design period, and people will be being asked, you know, both pre-planning and then, of course, in the statutory planning consultation thereafter. So, you know, once you have a partnership, that partnership will gear up to start that work.
Okay. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And I think there's just a general point that the administration, in terms of being ready for the consultation, it's going out in September with 10 proposals for 10 stories on the leisure centre site. It's something that will attract a lot of attention, and it's really important that that's taken on board. I don't see any on finances monitoring, so I just want to move on now to risk register. Just like, I know we are hoping to finish at 9. I think that is unlikely, and we'll go to our 9:30, but 9:30 will be our absolutely long stop point. So, are there any questions on the risk register? Candy. Candy, you're muted. But while you're muted, can I just remind everyone how short time we are? So questions short, answers short, great.
Yes, really short question. The papers indicate for the risks marked, they're all amber, except for 2. So I'm just wondering, why is it then deemed appropriate to be moving ahead with the project? Because amber's not bad, but not very good either for us to be proceeding.
Julian?
Well, I'm happy to have first go at that. Dawn might want to add, but of course, it's not the fact that you have a risk. Not everything can be green. The point is that you have mitigation in place to deal with it, and it would be perfectly legitimate to proceed with some red risks, provided you had the right mitigation in place. And I believe that the set of mitigation we have before you goes to that end. But Dawn, you might want to add something more scientific and sophisticated than that.
Dawn.
Sorry. No, I think you provided the key points, and I don't think it would be. I think it's quite. I mean, Julian and I had long discussions about this with Susan, and I think it's reasonable that at the start of the scheme, a number of the risks are amber. I think we're just being very realistic, and like Julian said, the crucial thing is that we've worked very hard on looking at all the mitigations and making sure that they're in place, and that's what we'll continually monitor as we move through this process.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions on risk register? If not, I think one of the things that I am worried about, and it's something I've raised through the informal sessions as well, is how much the council is fully ready for the risk. And one I think the biggest risk, and it's one we started on very early on, is political risk and political change. And this doesn't have to be through elections. That different decisions are made by the administration at different times based on public response. So I just worry that there's a number of really key things here where the mitigations are just a couple of bullet points. So under political change of administration, regular briefings, who's being briefed and how regular, contingency planning, well, what are the contingency plans, and appropriate legal mechanisms, which I'm not entirely sure I understand what that means. Planning risk. For planning risk, there's regular briefs to political groups. Well, I hope briefing to political groups aren't trying to mitigate planning committee risk, because that will cause all sorts of problems. I just think this is it doesn't particularly feel that worked up to me.
So I think, sorry, Chair, I think the first thing I'd start with, and I'll try and pick up a couple of your examples. If you take the mitigation in terms of appropriate legal mechanisms, well, we've already touched on some of those tonight. You do have the flexibility to allow you to change horses in your development agreement if you choose to do so. You also have the deadlock provisions. You also have the approaches to termination. I mean, one of the very important points that shouldn't be ignored is that this is a partnership, and if one of the points of having the partnership in existence is that you can sit down and discuss it and change your approaches. So I think that covers at least some of the examples of the mechanisms. No, I don't think anybody is trying to say that you can obviate all planning risk, because we live in a world where that's probably impossible. I think what we're saying here is that as long as people understand what is going on and what is being talked through, then at least you have put people in a position where they all understand what's going forward. I think in terms of working this up in more detail, well, as the scenarios develop, you can certainly add detail and words, but I think my advice to you would be that the key issue actually is for the partnership and for your officers going forward to be fleet of foot and understand what is happening, and to have built in those contingencies that we've described so you can react accordingly. I'm not sure at this stage that the words on the page of themselves will mean as much as the ability to react to the situations as they come. But I do think that the contingency planning in terms of the legal mechanisms, the building in of risks, risk allowances in the finances are the right steps to take you on that journey. I'm not sure whether Dawn or indeed Sean maybe wants to add anything to that.
I mean,
I'm happy to, Chair, but I'm conscious of time.
Yeah, I haven't got anything to add.
You don't? Okay.
I'm happy to, yeah, but I'm conscious of time, Chair.
If you don't have anything to add, that's absolutely fine. We won't hold it against you. In which case, Stephen.
Thank you. I mean, when we're talking about risks, isn't it a risk to be going into this, going into the signing of this contract without any idea really of what residents might think about some of the schemes that are being proposed, without having had the benefit of any form of consultation before actually committing ourselves to this contract and to this business plan, and to this financial schedule, and for all the things that are dependent on this, that might be very costly to change in the future.
So perhaps I'll have a go at that, Stephen. I mean, I think that I mean, my experience in Harrow is relatively recent. I guess what I would say though is it's been pretty self-evident to me that whilst there is not that there isn't necessarily unanimity, he says, being euphemistic, about the council's proposals in relation to the partnership and these sites. I think it would be hard for anyone to argue that people are not aware that the council has significant plans to redevelop these sites around housing, around new civic centre in Willesden, etc., etc. In my experience, that if you're talking about any form of development that is hugely controversial, you know, even when things are even less developed than this, that you know, you get uproar. I mean, I've worked in. I mean, I was saying to people, is my 30-year anniversary in local government today. The amount of times that, you know, even the slightest indication that you're going to develop something on a piece of land that people don't like, people are queued up round the block throwing things at the council on a regular basis. So I would say that there is no strategic indication to me that these sites for redevelopment are by themselves instinctively controversial. I think the second thing is, and you know, I know that there is, you know, again, historic controversy about how well these things have been done or not, but there has been pretty extensive consultation about actual schemes on a number of these sites previously. So I think that the idea that there isn't a significant amount of understanding about what's proposed, even if there are clearly different views about whether that's good or not, I think is not there. It's also been the case that this whole process has been done in the full glare of the public domain. So I'm not personally convinced, and this has included resident panels and all sorts of things at various points. I don't think that in advance of a detailed planning application, which I'm entirely clear could in itself create controversy and objections from large numbers of people, I'm not sure that there is much more that the council could have done to set its stall out about what its intentions are.
You might have seen me be a bit taken aback there when you mentioned that there was no indication that these sites are controversial.
They're controversial politically, absolutely.
No. Whether the political aspect is one thing. When these sites have been discussed before, you know, the proposals on the sites before were controversial. You know, people were, you know, lots of people were quite angry with them. I mean, some people like them, but you know, I wouldn't say that any of these sites are non-controversial. But I mean, what we don't know is obviously what is now in front of us is very different to what we had before. What we don't know is, I mean, you say that people are aware of what's going on. Some people are, some people aren't. You know, it depends on how switched on they are. But we haven't had an opportunity to internalize any feedback from what people might think. Nobody, you know, we haven't had a process whereby people can tell us what they think, where they can look at the plans in, you know, in a proper form and tell us what they think. We haven't had that process yet. That is to come.
Is there a question?
Well, okay, so then my question is, how can you say it's not controversial when given the history of these sites, and how can you say that people will be aware of what's going on without also having an idea of what people think about what is actually in front of us now, which is. I think Sean gets.
I think we get the tenor of the question. I'm not. Sean, do you want to quickly reply? I think it's more rhetorical. I think most of this.
I think I've covered the point. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I'm not sure there is much more to take on that. So, Julian, if you've got a short answer.
Very briefly, Chair. I was just going to say that I did advise you in September that it was important to progress and get a preferred bidder who you could work with in developing things up. My strong advice to you now, not the least of which to embark on public consultation, is to get yourself a partner so that you have the resources and you have the skills to do that work.
Okay, great. Are there any other questions around risks, mitigations? Okay, I'm going to move us on to housing. Any questions on housing? Well, I will start. The benefit of good messaging by me is that my point has been made twice by Sean, anticipating what I was going to say. But I will say it. Planning policy on public sector land is 50% affordable. That is where the starting point should be. It's what we've been proposed is less than that. What we are suggesting is us as a council are going to provide less than what we expect others to start with. So I think that's a general concern. But there is a question I've got for the administration again. And Graham's here for that. Throughout the report, there's lots of really good, and you know, I'm a strong supporter of us putting housing in the HRA and having it as council housing. There's a lot of strong words about, well, if it's possible, potentially having council buying the affordable housing stuff, but there's no commitment whatsoever to absolutely having using this programme as a catalyst for a new round of council house building. Can I just get an understanding from the administration why that has been done in that way?
It's an interesting question because we've been working with Waits, even though we haven't signed a contract, to look at other sites to get an outline and understanding what they think. But we have used this development partnership or this work to build other council homes across the borough. I think this brings in overall, within 2.5 years of being on site, we have another 900 to 1,000 council homes that we can bring into the HRA. Some of the sites out of the partnership have to go into a registered provider, and the council's looking through that to see whether it needs to set up under the covenant arrangements or not, because we've got to be careful of the right to buy. We don't want to sort of build something and have a financial risk against it, and then someone gets £100,000 discount on it, and then the council taxpayer is the one who loses out. So they are looking at moving a lot of them into the HRA, but the HRA is programmed to extend, I think, by 2023 by 18%.
There's no commitments in these papers for any HSDP properties to go into HRA. It's simply to look at, to consider. Even the Peel Road one it's not a definite in the paperwork. Are you saying it is now a definite in the paperwork that they will go into HRA?
No, that's what I'm saying. Because of the right to buy, they have to. There's an uncertainty around the right to buy. So you've got to might have to move it into an LLP, but we can set a rent on it.
Okay. Stephen, then Jeff.
Thank you. When the developments are built, who and this is obviously in terms of the development sites, obviously not necessarily including the new Civic because we know a bit more about that. But in terms of the housing sites, who will actually own the freehold when they're built? Related to that, will the market homes be sold as leasehold or freehold? And who will own and manage the PRS homes?
Chair, if I may, so in the order the questions was asked, sorry, forgive me, I've forgotten the first one. Just run those by me again, Steve.
Firstly, who will own the freehold of the site of the housing sites when they're built? Secondly, will the market homes be sold as leasehold or freehold? And thirdly, who will own and manage the PRS homes?
Splendid. Sorry, yes. The answer to the question is that in the plan here, as indeed in many London joint ventures, is that the freehold of everything except the houses will be retained by the council. The proposal is that the freeholds of the houses will be transferred to the end purchaser, and the most likely scenario is that the PRS will be owned and managed by our PRS provider, who will forward fund the development on behalf of the partnership. It is open, obviously, to the council to enter into that market if it wishes, but you would need to carry out a due diligence at that point.
So where will the PRS provider come from? Will that be tendered out, or how will that?
Correct. It'll be procured on the best offer by the partnership.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions on housing? No. Okay, I'm going to move us on to accommodation strategy, where Jean had indicated right at the start that I did say we'll come back to her towards the end. So I'm going to bring Jean in and then Canty.
Thanks very much, Sachin. Couple of things really, and it is, I'm afraid to say, because Charlie's not here, it's for you, Sean, really. We've raised several times, not because of, but prompted by the Sarah Everard case and her murder, around safeguarding and safety for individuals in and around the new Civic. And some of the issues have still not been we've not had anything back. The only response I had was from, I think it was Bahija, or no, it wasn't, it was someone else from Waits, and about, creating a safer environment and opening up the area. But some of the key things that we've experienced as women, but also men, and it doesn't matter who you are, but you have to make sure or provide safeguarding and provide a safer area. And coming to and from the Civic Centre, especially in the evenings, is going to be problematic. We were talking to Charlie and he mentioned things like taxis. Well, that's not going to suit me because I've got a condition where I couldn't possibly sit in someone else's car and things like that. So and that's just me. I'm not talking on behalf of me because this will be built way beyond some of our existence. So it's much more around how are we going to provide for access? How are we going to provide for free access for people? 1, our staff, 2, members, and 3, residents. And the Civic Centre is described here as a wonderful place for people to come and go. And there's a wonderful word here called permeable. Well, I don't think it's permeable. It doesn't sound permeable. It sounds as though, well, if you're going to come, take a risk, but you don't feel free enough to do that. And I'm not making a speech, sorry, Sachin, but I feel very strongly that we've raised this several times now, Sean, and we still haven't had a satisfactory response. Thank you.
Sure.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I mean, I'm happy to answer that absolutely as far as I can, Gina. I think that, so I think that what I'll try and do is to give you as, I suppose, as satisfactory a response as I can do at this point in time. I mean, clearly the Civic Centre, based upon the current plans, won't be built until 2025. And as you will know, in terms of doing risk assessments, both in terms of buildings and in terms of staff members, etc., relating to the operation of that building, it would be difficult to do a detailed person-based risk assessment at this point in time, for all the reasons that you can understand. I mean, what I can clearly do is to say that we take the safety and security of our staff incredibly seriously. I mean, we have staff who operate in very dangerous situations every day. To be honest with you, far certainly as dangerous, if not more dangerous situations than people attending evening meetings. You know, there are staff who are put in all sorts of levels of risk, depending on which clients they're dealing with, depending on what situation they're dealing with all the time. And whilst we can always do better, we are really focused in making sure that we have personal risk assessments for all staff who are in positions of vulnerability. So we would absolutely want to make sure that we do that as part of this. I think the other thing as well, I know that, and I'm sorry for mentioning the C word, Chair, but I know that car parking is a concern for people around the Civic Centre. The Civic Centre does not have no car parking. It has very limited car parking. Clearly, if you've got vulnerable people, vulnerable staff or vulnerable members who have concerns around safety, as part of a risk assessment, you would make sure that people were prioritised. So yes, I mean, at the moment we do all sorts of things for staff. For example, if people are working late at meetings, wherever that might be, and they're vulnerable, we would put a taxi. Jean, you said, just in using your example, you said that's fine, but I couldn't use a taxi. Well, if that was the case, you'd get a priority car parking space. I mean, this is about making sure that we do take this seriously and we personalise the response. So, I think what is difficult, Jean, and I'd really understand where you're coming from. It's very difficult to be specific about something that's not going to exist for a number of years, for which the design is not there and the context is not there. What I'd want to do is to reassure you that we have to take the security of our staff, we have to take the security of members and residents and members of the public really seriously, and we would do that. We already operate large numbers of staff out of Forward Drive, and I know that the perception is that the staff at Forward Drive are probably, you know, bin men who can look after themselves, but actually there are quite a lot of female staff who work out of Forward Drive at the moment. We make sure that they're looked after in a safe and secure way. And what Charlie has committed to do, both in relation to Forward Drive and longer term in terms of the Civic, is to prioritise all aspects of the security arrangements, and that's the case. I mean, I would personally say that I've left the Civic Centre. I've left the current Civic Centre after a late meeting and haven't felt terribly safe. So I do take the point seriously, but I think it is difficult to be incredibly precise when we are talking about a building that is not yet designed, a situation that doesn't yet exist, in a position which is a number of years hence, other than to provide you with, which isn't a fob off, a generic response to the fact that we will do detailed risk assessments at that point in time, and we will make sure that we have creative solutions if necessary to answer the question.
Can I come back on that, because I get what you're saying. I understand you're on the same page. However, if you're designing something, you design it now, you design in something, but what's happening at the moment? You mentioned the C word, car parking, but it's a security around car parking, but you can't design it in down the line because there won't be an opportunity for additional car parking or whatever it might be. And I haven't got a magic wand, but to be so content about 40 places plus 6 disabled places, it's just, honestly, Sean, it's just not acceptable. And if I really do understand where you're coming from in terms of doing something risk assessments at the time, but we are talking about And if you take very sadly the Sarah Everard case, she was just walking along the street. You know, it just happened. And I think I have obviously been coming to the car park for many, many years, and I feel safer because I can get out of my car, go in, and I know the security guys are watching on their CCTV. And if I go out late, it used to be 1 o'clock in the morning before we had guillotines. You go out late and you can get straight to your car, boop, and you're in, and you're, you know, safe as you can be. You lock the car. So there are some things that are really pertinent now because things don't seem to be getting better in terms of how people are protected, how they feel safe, and so on. So I would like our staff to feel safe if they do have to come in late, members of course, and also residents. Residents love to come to meetings and you know, say their bit. So
I suppose all I would say, Jean, I would be very surprised if in the I understand the general point about car parking. I would be very surprised if the 44 spaces plus 6 disabled was not sufficient to provide members, staff and members of the public with the security that was required if they were attending late night meetings at the council on the basis of the numbers.
That's the first time. Sorry, Sean, that's the first time I've heard anyone think that it's enough. I know Sean, Sasha,
Jean, I think
shut up, so I will.
Yeah, I think your point made. I think we know. I think Sean and the committee, I think know the point that you're making. Candy.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Chair. Just a couple of quick things in terms of just on the theme of this accommodation. Yes, yeah, one of the things that I know that it keeps getting mentioned that staff are sort of, you know, asked this question a while back, last year probably. I'm not clearly sure that, you know, how it is enticing or how it will affect the future recruitment strategy or, you know, staff, because essentially some of the departments are moving to the depot. If you just been around the depot, it's not necessarily the most ideal place to kind of say, you know, it's the best working environment. One, it's really secluded, it's in a corner, and next door you've got the, you know, the dumping facility and so on and so forth. And so I wouldn't say it's necessarily kind of the best kind of environment to be working in. So how that impacts staff who are going to be, well, in a way forced there, because once you made the decision, they've got nowhere to go. How does that impact the sort of future recruitment? I don't know. The fact that sort of, you know, the parking is a key issue. And obviously, before we forget, the car park in Byron where our council vehicles are parked at the moment, those are going to be displaced. And we were assured similarly, the car park in the Kenton Recreation Ground. So if you bring those couple of 100 vehicles into the new car park, you've got nothing left for staff, surely. So I think it's a big issue. We are being very optimistic every time we come here, but the facts, unfortunately, you know, I'm not sure they kind of, you know, exactly align with that view.
Okay. I'm not sure there's much more. What I'll do is, Chris, is your question on a similar point?
No, not quite. It's not a different fact. I'm not on what Candy's just been.
In which case, sure, if you want to come back.
Something different.
But quick, please.
I'm 100% convinced that the staff will be much happier working at Forward Drive than they are at the current Civic Centre. And I have given extensive staff briefings, as have Charlie, on a number of occasions over the last few weeks about the plans, and I've had nothing other than positive feedback.
Great. Okay, thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chair. My point, and I've brought it up before, and I'll keep bringing it up. When we leave the building in 22, and we're not getting to another one likely until 25, what are we doing with children's services? They've got to have a secure place where they can meet, be looked after, catered for, and that's got to be almost 24/7 because we have people coming in at the dead of night, and so we've got to have something to do with that. It keeps coming up, and no one's actually seems to have thought about it and got any further down the line. So if there is any in progress, I'll be very happy to hear it.
So I think, Chris, just to respond to your 2 points, I think that message could not have been received louder and clearer. Paul Hewitt is very clear about that. The portfolio holder is very clear about it. You're very clear about it. We will not move out of the Civic Centre unless we have a viable alternative for what you describe and also for housing. We have a significant amount of time. We are currently reviewing the estate and identifying alternatives. I would anticipate that by the autumn those alternatives will have been identified well in advance of any requirement to move. As I mentioned earlier, I have been involved in doing this type of project in 2 or 3 other councils. It is always a challenge to exactly find out exactly where things are going to go, but that's what you pay us to do, to make sure that we find a solution to these challenges, and I'm confident we'll do so.
Can I just say, it's a bit like my accountant when I told him if he doesn't save me money, I'll fire him. Yeah.
Exactly.
Watch this space.
Exactly, okay. I agree.
Stephen.
Yes, thank you very much. So with the decision that is in front of us for the HSDP, we've got quite a lengthy business plan, and that covers the things that are in scope of the HSDP. Why do we not have, given the the additional expenditures that are significant additional expenditures outside the HSDP, why do we not have a business plan like this for the accommodation strategy, looking at all the different expenditures, all the different contours and everything, setting it out like this so it's clear about what's happening?
So Dawn may wish to comment on this as well. I mean, I think my view is that we have the equivalent of some of this through the accommodation strategy, and clearly which captures the strategy around what the intention is, and also we have through various reports the allocation of the resources and the finance to support the delivery of the accommodation strategy. So I think that in practical terms we do have those two things. Stephen, where I think you do have a point, and I think it's something that we've had a discussion about as officers in response to member feedback, I think we can more effectively bring that together into one place where we can report the progress against that for members. So I think we've listened to what we've heard. So whilst I think we have it, I agree that there is a better way to capture it and represent it back to members so that members can monitor and challenge that to make sure that we're delivering against it.
Thank you. Just to follow up from that, well, I'm pleased to hear you've listened on that. Obviously, it would have been useful to have had that when the decision was made, but I appreciate you've listened on that. When can we expect that? And also, will it go into all the necessary detail about all and capture all the relevant expenditure, including the expenditure outside of the HSDP, in terms of for all the relevant expenditure for the accommodation strategy?
I mean, the short answer is yes, but Julian or Dawn may wish to add something to that.
Just to keep it very brief, we have talked about this. At the moment, the current plan is we're going to report on this quarterly. So we will show all the relevant budget pots that Sean has talked about that we have collected together for the accommodation strategy, and the plan is that we'll report on that, whether we're on track, issues, various of the factors, and we're going to report on that quarterly. That is the current plan.
Thank you. And what will be the manner of how will you report that?
Well, we are looking at whether we do it on a separate report or whether we include it in one of our quarterly reports that comes to Cabinet normally.
But to Cabinet, Stephen, basically.
Yeah, to Cabinet.
And presumably you'll need to have a business plan in place to do the reporting on. So presumably that will happen soon, will it?
I'm not sure that I would describe it as a business plan. We have an accommodation strategy and a budget. We'll monitor those two things through a single report.
Okay. Well, so when would the first quarterly report come out then?
We do it quarterly, so I suspect we probably won't do it for quarter one, which is due in Cabinet in September, so we will aim to do it for quarter two, which is December.
Okay, thank you.
And just to reiterate, we have got an officer-led accommodation strategy board, which will ultimately get reported to the portfolio holder to oversee the delivery of the accommodation strategy.
Right, thank you.
Sorry, I'm muted now. Jean.
Thank you. This follows on from that, and I appreciate you can't answer all these questions, but a couple of the things that have come up from various people is one is around where you probably need occasionally to take someone to talk to them privately. So it could be just a little bit of training, or it could be bereavement. So the areas that I've been interested in and been raised to me, one is registrars, because registrars, they're more than just running weddings. They're bereavement counselling, they're archive, we could have a strong room and all that sort of thing. And at the moment, as I understand it, you're looking at the barn or Headstone Manor, and it just strikes me that as an interim, that's going to really impact on the revenue and perhaps on the efficiency of the service. I know there's a thought further down the line, there's a building on the right that can be knocked down, rebuilt, but that's going to be several years ahead. So that's one thing. The other thing is IT. Where's IT going to be? And if people come to IT, they don't come to you. Well, they do sometimes, but not often. So how are they going to be able to see people to give them guidance, etc.? Those are my two. I've got lots more, but I know. I know. The third one. I will say it because I've got a vested interest. The mayor's parlour. I think it's the same issue. You know, so if we're still planning to isolate the mayor in the arts centre, is that a good idea? Because he or she's a leader of a community, and two, isn't that going to reduce revenue income? Thank you.
Right, Sean.
Sure.
Sean, you're muted.
Sorry, Chair. So, Jean, I'm just again based upon my experience of similar projects in other places. It is absolutely the case that when you do this, some of the interim solutions are not perfect. I wouldn't be sitting here and I wouldn't be telling you the truth if I said to you that interim solutions will necessarily be perfect. It's a bit like when you build a new road or when you build a new railway, or when you change something. There is a reality that sometimes for a period of time you have to accept that the solution that's put in place whilst you bridge between an old civic centre to a new civic centre may require an element of compromise. What we want to do is to try and minimise the impact of that compromise and make sure it's as respectful and as good as possible. And part of that will be, and Dawn can close her ears at that point, if in order to get a solution around things like sensitivity around bereavement, or making sure that the mayor is appropriately looked after and supported during their year of office, that has an impact on aspects of income, well, that's probably a compromise we'll have to make, because they're really important things that we need to do. And that's why, again, going back to Stephen's point, some of the costs relating to the ancillary space is being built into the budget, because there will be a cost of change. When you do this, it does cost something. So we don't have the answer to all of these things in detail yet. We are working on these now. We are prioritising making sure we answer. We do have a considerable period of time until we hand over the civic centre to the contractor, and we are very conscious about what people's concerns and priorities are. In terms of IT, that IT will be available at Forward Drive, so the support for members and for staff will be available there. And you can prove me wrong, but I think when members experience Forward Drive, their response will be wow.
That's the other thing we asked for. Sorry, yeah, that's the other thing we did ask for. Could we have a visit at Forward Drive sooner rather than later?
It's under construction, but it will be a modern state-of-the-art office building.
I'm sure we all look forward.
Thank you.
Chair, if I may, I am liaising with Keir to arrange visits, possibly in August, but perhaps in September.
Great. Okay.
Thanks, Julian.
Are there any other areas that haven't been covered that people want to cover in 2 minutes? No, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, just in terms of the infrastructure and planning, I mean, Harrow's worked well because it's has been quite well planned. Unfortunately, in terms of the number of stuff happening, and we've touched on this before, infrastructure wise, the liaison with TfL, the buses, trains, roads to support the lack of parking. And then you look at the drainage system. My residents already complaining about the flooding in the areas, and unfortunately being told nothing can be done. Not understood the impact of all the huge number of flats we're going to add, or apartments, or whatever it is. In the same way, there are other matters, schools, GPs, health facilities, well-being. Also, simple thing like broadband in terms of we're struggling already everywhere. Where that infrastructure is coming and what we have not been told. So I think there's a lot more in terms of in the detail which you're not seeing, and this is critical to having a properly planned, efficient city that's going to benefit not just new residents, we're being told, but existing ones. So when can we get an update on this?
Julian.
Oh, yeah, thank you, Chair. So in terms of the infrastructure required for the HSDP sites or relating to the HSDP sites, 3 brief comments. First of all, liaison between Waits and, for example, the people dealing with flooding and sewer capacity is already underway. Obviously, TfL and GLA, we've also been talking to them, and each and every one of those sites would require traffic. As far as the HSDP sites are concerned, the school implications have already been taken into account and been built into the plans, and the council is currently determining whether it does indeed want a school on Poets in the long term or not. So all of those things are being taken into account and are underway. I think it's reasonable to suppose you'd have an update on that when the next set of business plans come forward.
Great. Jeff, did you have your hand up? It was a real hand.
Yeah, I did earlier, but I was going to ask a question about housing and council housing, but that is more or less covered by your question.
Ah, okay, great. Stephen.
Thank you. Really sort of following on from what Councillor Abadia said. As we've discussed a number of times, there was supposed to be an overall parking strategy to support the regeneration, and across all the different sites to set out how that was going to work. And originally, I think we were expecting to see that before we signed off the HSDP, or even before the HSDP was brought to us in the first place. And I understand that's now been delayed. I'm just wondering when is that likely to come? Is there still a paper going to come to cabinet on that? What are the timescales on that?
Well, I think you'll recall, Councillor Green, that I did say to you at the accommodation scrutiny that in terms of the parking outside of the sites themselves, the options that we put to you in that paper were effectively all there was, and therefore we would work to examine the feasibility of those, and obviously that's one of the immediate tasks we need to crack on with now. As far as the sites themselves are concerned and the parking compliance and the numbers, I think I'm right in saying, but he just said earlier that obviously she'd be bringing those forward in the phase business plans for Byron Peel and phase 1 of Poets. So I think I would characterise it now at this stage in the nature of updates on progress rather than new strategy. And you'll recall I said to you I would that it were more sophisticated, but sadly that's the limit with what we've got.
Thank you. I mean, obviously, when you mentioned what we were told in the accommodation strategy, obviously a lot of that was quite vague. I mean, it was, you mentioned sites, but it was, there might be some here, there might be some there. We've got to look into this, we've got to look into that. Are you going to actually look into these things and come back to us with firm responses on what is actually going to be provided, and what on what timescale?
So the answer is yes. I hadn't programmed a timescale, but I would certainly expect to be bringing something back before the end of the year. We'd certainly have some feasibility on that, because a number of them can be done in that timescale. So in the autumn.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you. We're now running out of time, so I'm not going to take any more questions. We were hoping to do some recommendations. I think it would be to do this via email, perhaps between me and Stephen, we'll liaison with our respective groups. But I think recommendations are going to be around vision, around council housing, around risk register and consultation, around the makeup of the HSDP board, certainly something around KPIs, certainly something around the last 2 points about infrastructure planning. If that sounds all right, and we can kind of get the wordings right and circulate those to members of the committee. I don't see any dissent from that, but I think we've got a benefit of the fact that we've actually got a week and a half before cabinet, or 2 weeks before cabinet, so we've got a bit of time to get those recommendations over to cabinet that will go as alongside the minutes of the meeting. We didn't need to go into part 2, thankfully, which made life a lot easier. So before I end the meeting, I just got one announcement around the next meeting, which is a Q&A with the leader, the deputy leader, and the chief executive, which may or may not clash with an England match, depending on what happens on Saturday. We have been told there are a number of England players that are desperate to watch the Q&A, and therefore they would be worried if we were clashing, because they would not be able to. They would not be able to put enough effort onto the football match, and they'll be thinking about the Q&A. So to make it life easier for everyone, if we indeed are clashing with the England match next Wednesday, we will move the ONS meeting for the greater good of our country to the 12th of July. But that all depends on what happens on Saturday. Can I thank all the officers for all the effort? I mean, it's incredible the amount of work that goes into this. The amount of time given over to Scrutiny has been phenomenal. I've never seen a project with this much administration, political time and officer time handed over to the Scrutiny Committee. So can I thank all the officers for all the effort they put in to answer all our questions, send us all the emails, put together anything that we've asked for, sometimes not in the timescale that people are looking for, but it's been fantastic. Sean, through you to all the council officers that have been involved, Graham, through you to the rest of the cabinet that I know have been involved. Thank you all very much. We will we'll come to some recommendations which will take to cabinet, which will go to cabinet alongside the report. And on that note, at 9:31, can I thank everyone and say good night?
Good night. Thanks.